Hello, this is Storybooks channel. New videos are posted every day. Subscribe and click the bell.
The hell of Molly's early childhood. It seemed never to be forgotten. God forbid you let something like that into your own life. I'd rather throw myself in a noose or off a bridge into a river. And psychologists also say, making a smart face, that every man gets what he deserves. Was Molly born worthy of a life like this? Bullshit. They also say that a man makes his own destiny. And if you're humiliated, it means you let yourself be humiliated and bullied. And they say many other things without even trying to understand the situation. Talking with your tongue is not like unloading railroad cars. Molly. Once I tried to turn to such a specialist, but after the first visit to the psychologist's office, I realized that this is not her version of solving the problem. Look at these squares and choose the one you like. Molly was asked by a woman with glasses. The psychologist, who was recommended to the girl by Molly's work colleague, reached for the green square and took this one in her hand. "And why did you choose the color green?" asked the woman, looking intently at her clientele. Molly did not know what to answer to this question. She chose it without thinking. Molly liked green in general. It's a warm color associated with a sense of freedom. It's the color of grass in a field, the color of the long-awaited spring of hope for happiness. It was in spring that Molly and Stephen had their daughter. All through their pregnancy, the newlyweds didn't know who was to be born. One May Day, but the husband was sure of a son. It seemed that he did not even allow the idea that in addition to boys are born and girls. And Molly didn't care, as long as he was healthy. She planned to have more children. There should be at least 2 children in a family, and preferably 3 or 4. Molly herself once had a brother, but now she knows nothing about him. Molly's mother took her youngest son far away. Where is he now? She didn't know. "Come here, bitch, I'll kill you," the father yelled at the whole house. Sam came home again at 0 o'clock, drunk as a skunk. He started screaming from the doorstep. 6-year-old Molly woke up, covered her head with a blanket to hide next to her in the crib, crying 1-year-old Robert. Mom jumped up, ran to her father. He demanded his shoes off, lying on the hallway floor, unable to get to his feet. The woman urged him not to shout. The children were asleep, but the father wouldn't stop. "What are you afraid of?" The fool did not wait for her husband, and should wait like a faithful dog under the door. Molly's mom dragged her drunken husband on herself to the bedroom, and he continued to swear, barely dragging his feet. "Hush, hush," whispered Mom. "You'll go to bed now. You'll rest when you sleep. You're tired from work." "I'm tired. I earn money. And you're sitting at home, you little goats." Yes, you're good. You earn money." The woman tried to calm down her father. He suddenly stopped, stretched like a string, and looked at her with an angry look. "You are not enough. I don't earn enough. I feed you freeloaders. You're sitting on my neck." There was a bang. Father hit his wife in the face, and when she fell to the floor and kicked her, he collapsed on the bed, and in a minute fixed it. Good, at least he didn't hit Mom for long today, Molly thought. The girl got up from the bed, gave Robert a pacifier to calm him down. She turned her brother on his side, stroked his back. The boy stopped crying. The mother entered the room, covering her face with one hand. "Lie down." Molly fell asleep. "Your daddy will not wake up until morning now." The woman lay down with her daughter, put her arm around her, and falling asleep, the girl heard her mother quietly sobbing howls. In the morning, the mother fussed in the kitchen, preparing breakfast for her husband. Molly looked out, and a little at opening the door, her father in sweatpants and a t-shirt, holding his head, walking down the hallway from the bathroom. The girl quickly shut the door. "It wasn't time to go out yet. We have to wait until Daddy goes to work, or he'll cuss again about getting in the way." Molly didn't even have to peek. She knew that now her mother would put food on his plate and put half a glass of vodka for her father to drink. She herself would pack her husband's lunch in a plastic container, so that at work he would eat, and he would drink in one gulp from the glass, cry out in relief, put his fist to his nose, and sigh greedily. Robert woke up and stood in the crib. Molly got him, sat him up, and began to remove the boy's pajamas. Then she pulled a clean t-shirt and pants out of the closet. She put socks on his feet. "Here you are, my beautiful, clean, sleep, little one," she said to her brother. Came alive, curly, dark hair. "Mommy," little man said, pointing to the door. "That Mom. And you and I are going to sit here for a while." She had already put a plush venison in his hands. "We'll play here, and then Daddy will go to work. And then we'll go to Mommy's." When the front door slammed, Molly took her father's hand and led him into the kitchen. Mommy was making porridge. When the woman turned to the children, the girl saw a huge bruise on her face and a swollen eye. "Sit down and sit down," Mom said herself. "I'll feed them now." She put plates in front of the children, put oatmeal porridge, poured tea for Molly, and heated milk for her brother. "If you're home today, I won't take you to the garden," she said quietly to her daughter. Molly didn't even bother to ask. Why would she have to stay home? She understood that her mother would not go out with such a face. She would not show it to people. She was ashamed of what her husband was doing. She hid everything from acquaintances and neighbors. Only grandmother Clara knew how hard it was for her daughter to live with a drunkard husband. Slaga stopped by on her way to the post office. When she saw her daughter's face, she sighed and sat down on a stool and started again. Has he gone completely off the rails? Goddamn Herod. Molly wanted cookies. Grandma Clara never came empty-handed. She'd bring the kids candy or chocolate-covered buns. What for this time? Or are you gonna say you backed yourself into a corner again? I won't. Mom sadly answered the woman. My strength is already gone, and I'm telling you for the 1,000th time to run away from him. Where am I going to run to? Guys, where am I going to put this on? Grab the kids, run, or he'll kill you, you drunkard. Molly's mom was looking out the window. Tears dripped from her eyes. She cried from pity for herself and her children, from hopelessness, from the injustice of life. She never did anything bad about her husband, took care of 2 children, gave birth to a good hostess, and he was not a day sober and even cried. She even called the police once. She was afraid he'd really kill her and the kids. They took her husband to the station, and when he came back, he beat her even worse. Molly's father was a tough man, worked at the motor pool as a mechanic, made a good living. There was always food in the house. Mom dressed the kids well. On the day of a paycheck or advance payment, her father would put a wad of bills on the kitchen table for expenses and leave a part of it in his pocket. For the groceries, you buy something there was going to paper, boots, or something. And don't forget to pay the rent. My father never made my mother to report where she spent the money, and she sometimes built something to put away in the stash, saved on himself that you go like a scarecrow vegetable garden. Once said the husband to his wife, I give you not enough money, or what I give you, buy yourself some new clothes or go to the hairdresser. Grandma, are you in the end or not? I'll go. The woman agreed with him. She knew that by evening he would forget about his words, would not even ask if she bought herself a new outfit. And she could save money to buy something for the kids. On weekends, her father would get hungover in the morning and be kind. On such days, he showed attention to his daughter and little son, played with them. Dad used to carry Robert on his back, laughing, pretending to be a horse, crawling on all fours across the floor. Molly laughed. How funny. It was working out for him. While Mom was putting things in order, he led the children into the yard. There the men would gather around the table in the shade of the dew and birch trees. They'd play cards or dominoes, and someone would bring out a bottle. By the end of the day, my father would be drunk again, and it was good if he fell asleep on a bench under a tree. Then Mom would take the kids home, and Molly was glad her father didn't fight. Grandma Clara scolded her mother every time, saying that she would wait for her father to kill her. But she just cried quietly. Yes, he's sick, Mom. You know, the woman said. Alcoholism is a disease, yes. And you think manhandling is a disease too? Why don't we go find a doctor to take his fists off? I don't care if he drinks all the vodka in the world. Why is he hitting? He's out of control. He doesn't know what he's doing at times like this. But he's a good man, and he loves his kids and brings money. Aha, shook her head Grandmother Molly. And then for every bill he paints your face. Get away from him. I'm telling you again, it won't end well. Where would I go? Can't you hide in your house? He'll find you and bring you back. He'll be more angry than ever. I don't care if I go to the end of the world. You can't live like this. You're still young. You won't be able to leave the house for a week again. Where would you go with such a lantern under your eye? There was no one to stand up for Molly's mom. She didn't complain. She just put up with it. Every time she thought her husband would make it up to her, but the hunchbacked man can't help himself. That terrible day, 6-year-old Molly remembered for the rest of her life. She and her mom were coming home from the store. Molly, holding Robert's hand, was leading her brother up the stairs. Mommy was dragging the stroller up to the 3rd floor. The girl made for the door, led her brother into the apartment. Molly's mother came in, took off her jacket, boots, and hat, and hung it on the coat rack. She was about to undress Robert. The father came out of the room. He was staggering, holding his hand to the wall. The man yelled, "I'm here, and there's nothing to eat. I'm here, and there's nothing to eat. Now I'll feed you." Mother did not undress, hurried into the kitchen, and her father followed her. She poured soup from the pot on the stove, put it on the table next to the plate, and put a spoon. Father looked at the food with a wild look. What kind of ballad is this? He swung at the woman, and she pressed her back against the refrigerator. "Are you going to eat that yourself now? You bitch." Dad grabbed the plate and poured it on Mom. "You like it," he hissed at her. And then he punched her in the face. Don't hit, and the kids will see." The woman tried to cover her face with her hands, but that only made the drunken husband even angrier. He started beating her Messiah like a punching bag. Falling to the floor, she tried to crawl out of the kitchen, but the foot in the boot reached her and beat her on the sides of her stomach back. Suddenly, the father stopped angrily, looked at his wife, and grabbed the knife she had just used to cut the bread. He brought the knife over his wife. The woman huffed and jumped to her feet and, grabbing Robert, rushed to the door. Molly scrambled into a corner, closed his eyes with a drunken gait. Dad followed Mom with a knife in his hands. A door slammed, and then a rumbling sound was heard. Molly opened her eyes and saw her father fall to the floor in the hallway, lying on the floor. He had caught hold of some clothes that were hanging in the wall of the slide. That did not resist and fell on the man. At the noise and rumble, neighbors ran into the apartment. Molly saw them lifting the heavy closet, trying to free her father, watched as a neighbor shook him, and then saw a dark rivulet spread out, her father's head dangling across the hallway floor. "Murdered," said the neighbor. "That's it," said her husband, "dead." Calling the police, Molly watched as a man in a police uniform entered the apartment, as they then covered the grain from the couch, motionless. The father's body was carried out of the house in a pool of blood on the floor. The girl sat in the corner until she came running. The panting grandmother. "Spoons," Molly imprinted she, examining her granddaughter. "You are unharmed. You were not touched by this idiot. My little girl." Molly snuggled against her grandmother's warm body. The woman hugged her, kissed her forehead. "Is there a God in the white world spared you from torment?" said grandmother, looking her granddaughter on the head. "Not for nothing they say, no matter how much you twist the rope, there will be an end." Clara dressed Molly and took her home. "Grandma, where is Mom?" asked the girl on the way. "Who knows?" replied Klaga. The neighbors only saw how she ran across the yard with Robert in her arms, hid somewhere, probably. Good thing she got away in time, or your daddy would have killed her. And all the guilt, damn it. He was a good man once. Grandma read all the way through. That day Molly clearly learned the greatest evil in life is alcohol. If your father hadn't drunk that damn vodka, We would have lived like all normal people in peace and harmony, but he was always reaching for the bottle. Have mercy on the soul of your servant, God, mumbled Clara. He lived like a drunkard, and he couldn't die properly. You, Molly, stay away from drunks. They're not people. They're beasts with a terrible beast inside. Molly didn't understand what kind of beast was inside her father. She was afraid of people who drank more than anything else in her life. She began to live with her grandmother, and she said every chance she got, "Wine is evil. There's nothing good in a bottle, only trouble." That's why when the girl introduced her fiancé to Slaga, the first thing she asked was if you drink. "No way, Grandma. He doesn't take a drop in his mouth. Never, ever, ever," said Molly, not letting Stephen answer, and he confirmed her words by nodding his head. A few months after Molly's mom disappeared, Grandma received a letter on an envelope. There was no return address, but the handwriting the letter was signed with was something she knew well. The daughter had sent word. The woman didn't print the letter right away. She opened it only when she got home. She slowly undressed and sat down at the table in the kitchen. The envelope contained one piece of paper and a photograph. The picture was of a father, mother, and children, with a half-year-old Robert sitting on Molly's mother's lap being held by a smiling Molly. When the picture had been taken, Clara didn't know. She had never seen it. The woman put the picture aside and picked up the sheet. "Don't look for me or think of me. Mother, please raise Molly. Take good care of her. Also let her remember that I love her and that she has a brother. Your daughter." Clara ran her eyes over those skimpy lines several times, as if trying to learn something else from them besides what was written. The daughter had run away from the husband who had made her life a living hell. It's even scary to think what would have happened to her children if on the day when that violent drunkard raised a knife at her, she hadn't managed to escape, but she managed to run away, grabbing her son. She was afraid to go back for her daughter. "Where's your daughter with you? Not knowing that your man is dead and you can live in peace," thought Clara, looking out the window. There was her granddaughter playing with other girls who would now have to be brought up. She knew she could do it, but she could hardly replace the child's mother. Now the woman finally realized that her daughter would not come back. Molly did not cause her grandmother any problems. She grew up an obedient girl, helped as much as she could around the house. She studied diligently at school, but she was not an excellent student. It was not particularly given to her studies. But Molly loved to draw. Her grandmother did not bought her pencils, felt-tip pens, paints, and brushes. She liked to watch her granddaughter's creativity. Sometimes, they took out a photo card together. The message in the letter from Mom was being looked at. Molly never forgot her brother. In her drawing, she often depicted herself next to him, as well as her mother in a beautiful dress, in polka dots, and her grandmother. But she did not draw her father. The subject of her dad's death was very unpleasant to her. Sometimes she would break up her old man's grumbling into a long monologue about how drunks are subhumans and should stay away from them. After graduation, Molly learned to be an active designer, got a job as a mannequin in her client's salon. In line lined up, because they knew such drawings on the nails nowhere else will not meet. Molly brought out any ornaments, flowers of animals made fashionable and stylish French. To her in advance recorded and young girls, and ladies of venerable age. Very quickly the girl became independent. She began to earn good money. Grandmother rejoiced. Her granddaughter now takes care of her all the time. Returning from work in the evening, Molly always went to the confectionery to buy her grandmother some dessert. On holidays, she always gave her gifts. I am a senior citizen, glad for the years she raised and educated Molly. She had no time for herself. She pulled the girl on her pension and the money she got from the tenants. On the advice of a neighbor, she rented out her daughter and her husband's apartment. At least some money to supplement her pension. And Molly, even after she became independent and began to earn money, was not going to leave her grandmother. So they lived together until Molly met Stephen. It happened at a friend's wedding. Nancy worked with Molly in the same salon. The girls immediately became friends and over time even began to confide in each other women's secrets. True, in the life of Molly, and there were no special secrets. Home, grandmother, work, but Nancy's life was going strong. The pretty hairdresser was a hot commodity with guys who followed her around in her herds, and the girl took advantage of them. She'd go out with one or the other. After Tails, he has a nice car. He's always got money. He takes me to cafes and treats me. And Christopher's smart. He's interesting. She told Nancy about the guys she'd been seeing at the same time. And if one of them finds out that you're messing around with both of them, Molly asked. But he finds out. So what? I'll still have the other one. My friend laughed, and it was as if she was in the water, wasn't it? One day, Kevin was waiting for Nancy at the salon door. He stood leaning against the hood of his foreign car with a bouquet of flowers and waited patiently. "Where are you going today?" Molly asked her friend at the mirror. "I do not know. Maybe to a restaurant, or maybe somewhere else. As long as everywhere the doors are open. Wherever I want to go, that's where I'll go." "You sure you made a date with Kevin tonight, not Solovki? You sure I'm stupid or something? I have Christopher on odd numbers. And what's our date on even numbers today?" The girl broke away from her image in the mirror and pointed to the calendar sitting on the wall. "That's right, 22. So that's how many and walking." They mixed it up. Molly persisted. "Yes, that something is attached," waved away her friend. "Nothing. It's just that there's a guy looking at our windows nearby, and he reminds me very much of your Christopher." Molly nodded at the young man who stood with a bouquet of chrysanthemums under a tree opposite the entrance to the salon. Nancy darted to the window. "Oh shit, where the hell did you come from?" She sensed so that none of the boys noticed her. Nancy ran up to Molly Morozenko. "Honey, go distract Christopher, take him around the corner so I can get away." My friend folded her palms in front of her, begging Molly for help. "Well, no, you're not getting me into your intrigues." Molly refused. "What am I gonna tell him? How am I gonna lead him around the corner? Are you out of your mind?" Nancy sighed heavily. There's no way out. She'd have to do something. And she headed for the exit, and Molly stared out the window, wondering what was going to happen next. What Nancy was saying to her suitors, she couldn't hear. She could only guess. But I could see Kevin pulling her friend's hand toward him, and Christopher tossing the bouquet on the ground at Nancy's feet. Then Kevin and Molly got in the car and drove off. Good thing it didn't come to a fight. The situation was resolved in Kevin's favor. A few weeks later, Nancy announced to her friend that they had applied and would soon be married. Molly, of course, was among the invitees. "With Kevin, I will be like a cheese in butter," said the friend. "He has a lot of money, and he doesn't refuse to spend it on me. And among his friends, he's also looking for someone. You'll get married like me and you'll be fine." Molly was fine as she was. She didn't want to get married. She thought she had time for it. She lived well with her grandmother. She had doubts about finding a man worthy of her father. Molly well remembered how he beat her mother, drunk on vodka, to the point of madness. But at the wedding of a friend, Molly still met her future spouse. It was a friend of the groom's. "Meet Kevin." Kevin introduced his buddy to the girl. "This is Stephen." "Molly," she replied, smiling at the handsome guy. "And you probably know everyone here already?" Stephen asked. "You know, absolutely no one. Except that I just met you. And I don't know anyone here except the bride and groom, so I suggest we stick together." "I agree." At the restaurant, they sat side by side. Stephen turned out to be very gallant, courting, freezing. The girl immediately said she only drinks mineral water or juice. "I don't drink either," Stephen said. "Not at all." "What a good boy you are," Molly rejoiced. "I don't like drunks." "Neither do I. But tell me, what good is it when a man drinks? There are a lot of interesting things in the world. And he drowns his life in a glass." "That's right. I think so too." Molly liked the guy more and more. He asked her to dance, and she noted that he moved pretty well. The wedding was fun. When the guests started to leave, Stephen offered to walk Molly out. "Do you live far away?" he asked. But the girl did not even have time to answer anything as he said, "Yes, it is in principle. Anyway, the weather is good. We'll walk. Actually, it's a bit far. I wanted to take a cab to my house," trying to dissuade the guy from walking Molly, but he had already taken her under the elbow and led her down the street. "The weather's nice. We can walk. Why pay money for a cab? You could walk halfway around the world in such good company." The words that Stephen was pleased to walk with her flattered Molly no end. And the compliment. Except her legs were bugging. She wasn't used to walking in high heels for so long. After walking halfway, Molly asked Stephen, "Let's sit on a bench. A lot of people are tired." They sat down. There were stars in the sky, but the little girl did not want to admire them. She wanted more than anything to be in her bed and stretch her legs. But after 5 minutes, Stephen got up and held out his hand to her. "Come on." They walked slowly down the street toward the engine house, saying goodbye to Molly in the driveway. Stephen asked for her phone number. "Maybe I'll call you. Take a walk sometime tonight." It wasn't Molly's policy to give out her number to anyone, but now she didn't think it was worth it. The girl quickly dictated the phone number and disappeared into the entryway. Going up to her floor, she felt that her legs were showing at least on her knees on the stairs crawled. Friday, Stephen called her. "I have tomorrow off. I want to go for a walk in the park. What do you think about it?" he asked. "Why not? Let's meet at what time?" "Let's meet at the main entrance at 6. "Okay, I'll be there. I'll be waiting. Don't be late." The guy talked to her like an old friend, like they'd known each other for a long time. It seemed a little strange to her, but Molly banished the doubt, thinking that she had gone completely feral. She doesn't date guys and doesn't know how young people socialize nowadays. "Who called?" Nancy swept up Paul after leaving a client whose haircut she had just given. "Molly," Stephen said vaguely. "You guessed it. He asked me out tomorrow." "Wow. I guess he likes you." My friend smiled. "Yeah. He liked me so much he walked me across town in heels yesterday after the wedding." "You could have called a cab." "Come on, Stephen. He's a nice guy. He just wanted to be with you, I guess. Tell me about him. What does he do? Where does he work?" Molly decided she had to know something about him before she went on a date, and she was sure she would. Stephen had asked her out on a date. "I don't know exactly," Nancy said, setting aside the long-handled brush she used to sweep the floor. "I know he's a manager in some company, that he's always got money. Lives with his mother, I think. Not married." "Why? Why what?" Didn't understand the question. "Nancy, why not married? He looks about 30. He should be married by now." "Well, that's for each man to decide for himself. Maybe he just hasn't met the one and only." Nancy raised her eyes to the ceiling and then stared at Molly with a believing look. "And you, friend, don't fidget. For once a guy's paying attention to you, you have to charm him. And to celebrate, I can give you the best haircut ever." "Thanks, Nancy. Don't." Molly seemed unnecessary, especially for Stephen. "I'll just go for a walk. Maybe sit in a cafe or go on a ride. A special hairdo is inappropriate here." The next day, Molly was going out with Stephen. She was applying her makeup in front of the mirror when Clara walked into the room. "Where are you going, Molly?" Grandma asked. "Yes, to the park." "And with whom, if it's no secret?" "Not really." The old lady was curious. "No. Nancy, now a married woman from work, runs home and spends weekends with her husband. Who else would she be with?" Molly didn't usually go out with anyone else, so she couldn't wait to get an answer with a guy. "Name's Stephen. I met him at Nancy's wedding. He's a friend of her husband's." Molly turned to her grandmother and asked her out. "He's a nice guy." Still, curiosity got the best of her. Seemed normal. What could Molly tell about Stephen if she would only see him for the second time today? The girl painted her lips, moved a little away from the mirror, looked at how the dress fit. On the whole, the image suited her. "What a beauty you are." "Granddaughter," said Clara, "it's a pity your mother can't see you. She'd be happy. She loved you very much." "Grandma, why are you talking about her in the past tense?" "Who knows? I'm just used to her not being around, and probably never will be. Why didn't she come running to me then? Why didn't she seek protection from the police? She'd be living with us now. And Robert too. Now, how can you find them in a world this big? You and I both know she was afraid of her father. I just want to believe that she's alive, and that her brother's alive, and that they're all right. God willing, God willing." I shook my head. Every day, all these years, she prayed to God that her daughter would give news of herself. But there had been no tidings. "But I'll give you a kiss before you go. The boy's probably waiting for you." As Molly approached the main entrance of the park, she caught sight of Stephen. To her surprise, he was dressed plainly, not flashy, and she was already confused. She put on her best dress. He'd spent an hour working on her hair. And Molly expected Stephen to come to the meeting with flowers. And she and Nancy Kevin are friends. The girl was used to the fact that her friend's suitor always showed up with a bouquet, and his friend didn't consider it necessary to buy flowers on the way. It was kind of a weird residue on my soul, but Molly chased it away. And the unpleasant thoughts. What's the big deal about no flowers? After all, it's just a walk between two people who don't know each other, she thought. There were many people in the park on a Saturday afternoon. Parents were walking with their children, queuing at the ticket office to buy tickets for the rides. There were pensioners and couples sitting on benches. Stephen and Molly were spanking. It had been so long since I'd been to an amusement park. Almost nowhere to go, no fun, the girl told me. So that's normal with the way we live. Work is home. It's not about fun, Stephen replied. What do you think happiness is? Molly decided to ask this difficult question, thinking that now we'll hear a long reasoning story in the stability of life. Answered the lad. And Molly looked at him in surprise. What do you mean? You see, Molly, when a man has everything and he does not need anything, he can feel happy. A nice apartment, a family, a wife and kids, a financial safety cushion, but it's saving for a rainy day, to make sure that tomorrow your family and loved ones won't go around the world with their hand out. Then I can tell you're not entirely happy. Why not? I am. But you're not married, and you talk about family as part of what should make a man happy. Stephen laughed. I suppose you're right. I lack a wife and a family to make me happy, but that's fixable, isn't it? He looked at Molly questioningly, and she was suddenly confused, not knowing what to say. I guess. Why don't we go on an amusement ride? I haven't been on a ride in 100 years. The girl suggested. You're like a little kid. Let's just walk around and talk. So we'll go on a merry-go-round with you, next to 5-year-old children. Molly sighed. She wanted to sit down, but the benches along the alley were occupied. They already were. They'd already circled the park for the 5th time. Stephen was an interesting conversationalist, but Molly wanted to rest ahead in the shade of the trees. She saw a small summer cafe. Come and have a coffee. She pointed with her hand at Stephen's table. Without much enthusiasm, he followed in the direction Molly pointed. It was obvious that his plans did not include sitting in a cafe. What shall we order? Molly asked. When the girl in the black skirt and white shirt brought the menu, also wanted only coffee, Stephen stretched out. I'm hungry. Why don't we eat something? Molly noticed that her beau tensed reading the menu, as if he was counting something, making complex mathematical calculations. I'll have a salad, fish steak, and ice cream. He looked at her, then back at the menu. And I'll have ice cream and coffee, please, the guy said. Waitresses, waiting for Molly's order, looking around, the place seemed very cozy to her. Nearby was a small pond in which ducks swam. The crowns of trees were reflected in the water. The girl watched the boy and his mother feeding the birds, throwing pieces of bun into the pond. She mentally went back to her childhood. Her grandmother used to bring her here, and they used to feed the floating birds too. Only they'd thrown regular cookies into the water. The food at the cafe was delicious. Satisfied and fed up, Molly sought coffee. She waited for further suggestions from Stephen, but he was thoughtful. When the waitress brought the bill, the guy took his wallet out of his pocket. "Oh, I'm a fool," he said, looking in his wallet. "I forgot the money. I've only got enough for ice cream and coffee." Molly thought he was embarrassed in front of her. She hastened to reassure her beau. "You're upset, aren't you?" "Who wouldn't be? I have money with me. I'll pay you back." She took out her purse and paid the bill. On their way back from the walk, Stephen started talking about how it was too wasteful to eat in cafes. It was much cheaper and healthier to cook at home. Molly took these words as a call to action. "You know, I'm not a bad cook. I could take you out to dinner." Stephen nodded his head a moment, then said, "A good hostess must know how to cook. At the same time, she will not buy expensive products, but will be able to set the table from the minimum. Can you do that?" "I guess, but it's better to have all the right ingredients for a meal." "Then I want you to invite me to visit," smiled Stephen. But Ivanovo did not follow any time soon. Stephen disappeared somewhere, did not call, and did not appear. Maybe he didn't like me, Molly thought. She asked Nancy to ask her husband where Stephen had gone. "He's got a crush on you after all." She laughed, squinted slyly at her friend. "I just liked him. Besides, we said we'd have dinner at my place. I'd already thought of what I'd cook." And he suddenly disappeared. "All right, I'll find out," Nancy promised. But Stephen showed up as suddenly as he disappeared. He called Molly in the evening, said he'd been very busy with a lot of things to do. The guy apologized and asked if her offer to invite him to visit was still valid. "Of course," rejoiced the girl. "When is it convenient for you?" "Let's make it a weekend." Molly mentally began to prepare for a new meeting. She wondered what her grandmother would say about the guy. Would she approve? That her granddaughter had a beau. What if she didn't like him? On the appointed day, Molly was in the kitchen preparing for dinner. She and her grandmother covered the table with a snow-white tablecloth, which was only taken out on special occasions. The girl left the cutlery, and Clara kept an eye on the peach pie that was allowed in the oven. Stephen looked respectable. He was wearing a handsome suit, as if fresh from the store, and holding a bouquet of roses, which he handed to Molly's grandmother. "Very glad to meet you." He shook hands with her. Molly escorted the guy to the table. She was a little worried. She and her grandmother hardly ever had men in their house, and here was a young, handsome guy, with whom a girl would start something more than just friendship. Stephen looked with satisfaction at the dishes as if by magic, appearing on the table very beautifully. "And it must be delicious too," he asked Molly. "And you try it. Don't be shy." Molly offered the guest a salad, an appetizer, a hot dish. "We also have a pie with peaches for tea treats." Grandma was there, pulled a bottle of cash out of the cupboard. "It looks like the groom's coming. We should buy him a drink." But Stephen made a warning gesture. "I don't drink," he said, when he saw that Clara had put the liquor on the table. "Not at all?" asked the pensioner. "Not at all. Alcohol is the greatest evil that can be in life. Why waste your money and your life on it?" "That's good. That's right, young man," Clara said approvingly, hiding the bottle back in the cupboard. The dinner passed in a good-spirited atmosphere. Stephen talked a little about himself. He asked Molly's grandmother more about their life. "We live like most people," she said. "I raised the car alone. She's been through a lot, but she's been a good girl. My granddaughter is a hard worker. She's not frugal, and she's appreciated at work." As soon as Molly started working, it was much easier for us. When the girl went to the kitchen to make tea and treat Stephen with a cake of her own making, she asked the guy in a conspiratorial tone of voice, "What are your intentions with Molly?" Serious. He was not at all embarrassed by the question asked straight to the forehead. Stephen looked confident and calm. "Molly is a wonderful girl. I'd marry her." He thought for a moment and continued, "You know, Clara, it's hard to find a good wife these days. Girls want to go to bars and restaurants, to have fun, to visit beauty salons. They buy things for themselves as if it's their last day. And more often than one, twice one dress does not wear. All this makes chaos and confusion in family life. I want stability. I want everything in the house. I want my children to grow up. So marry Molly. The woman smiled. And guessing. And she's my no-frills, modest, good earner. At work, she is appreciated by her clients in advance in line to her. Very much Clara wanted to understand great-grandchildren, and to go to the other world knowing that none of her cars will remain. And Stephen thoughtfully said, and maybe I'll get married. After dinner, they said goodbye. Molly thought Stephen would invite her for a walk, but he said he had a lot to do tomorrow morning, so he needed a good night's sleep. And 2 months later, Molly and Stephen applied for a marriage license. How did it happen? Molly didn't understand. It was as if she was asleep and dreamed about proposing to a girl. Stephen did not even bring flowers, but Molly did not pay much attention to it. The main thing he said was, "I want you to be my wife." Isn't that the kind of words every young girl dreams of? Grandmother rejoiced. Well, shall we get ready for the wedding? I have some savings. A little, but I'll help as much as I can with readiness to participate in the celebration, and enthusiastically took the news pensioner. We won't do the wedding, Stephen said firmly. It would be wasteful. We'll have to call a lot of people. You know, just as you call one person, you have to call another. Or they'll take offense. Right. What about without guests? Clara was perplexed. When my mother, my daughter, got married, there were 80 people at the wedding. It was a lot of fun. And where's the car now? Mom. Stephen asked this question in such a tone that Slaga got cold inside. The guy noticed that the pensioner changed her face and softened her tone. You see, it's not about fun. It's just a matter of why feed a crowd of people. Why spend money that could be put aside for something worthwhile, like a down payment on a mortgage or a new car? Nowadays, weddings are not justified. Gifts are given cheap, just to present. And what's the 10th thing? Yes, Grandma Molly has entered the conversation. We can go out to a restaurant. You're Stephen's mom, and maybe a few friends. There's no need for a restaurant. Her fiancé interrupted. You're a great cook. We'll set the table at home and sit down. He said it in such a tone that no one dared to argue. Well, home is home. True, Stephen didn't even offer to take care of the groceries. And there was a lot to buy for the holiday table. Shining with happiness, Molly told her friend about the upcoming event. Are you and Kevin invited? Are we going to celebrate at our house? She said, handing Nancy a small invitation card. Why not at a restaurant? Nancy wondered. Stephen thinks it's a waste of money. We can save money. I'll cook it myself. You've got a wedding and you're going shopping. Standing at the stove for 2 days, and by the time everyone's raised their glasses and shouted bitter, you'll look like a squeezed lemon. I don't think so. And yes, about the raising of glasses, Stephen doesn't drink. My grandmother and I, don't drink either. So we've decided there will be no alcohol, not even champagne. My friend's eyes went wide. Stephen said that if anyone wanted to drink to our happy married life, they could bring alcohol with them. Nancy couldn't find the words. It seemed to her that this was not a wedding, but some kind of negotiation between two parties making a deal. But since her friend and her fiancé had decided so, she wouldn't argue. It's not right, though. It's not human. Did you even look at your wedding dress? She didn't know what to expect from her friend, who was going to save money on the main event in her life. The only thing I looked at wasn't the dress. It was a doomed suit in a very beautiful, soft blue color. I can wear it a few more times, and the dress will be dusty in the closet, or I'll have to sell it. Yes, Molly, your case is clinical, but it's up to you. Nancy's position on male-female relationships was firm. In couples like the one she had with Kevin, it is usually said that the father works and the mother is beautiful. What does it mean that a woman doesn't have to provide for her family? It's enough that she graces the man's life with her presence. No, of course, no one forbids to work, but in their own pleasure and not to the detriment of their favorite. And the husband must earn, Bring to the house not only mammoth in the form of products, but sometimes and get for the wife jewelry trip to the sea different bonuses in the form of outings to restaurants. After work, Molly ran to her parents' apartment. Grandmother asked the tenants to come in to pick up the money for the next month. Returning home, she heard the phone ringing in her purse. It was Stephen. They exchanged the usual sentences. The guy complained that he was very busy at work, so he wouldn't be able to help the bride with grocery shopping. And she told him that the tenants were renovating her apartment. Can you imagine? I came, and they are tearing off the old wallpaper. They said they wanted to do some cosmetic repairs. They have a baby on the way. That's good, Stephen replied. At least you and I won't have to clean it up when we move in. Otherwise, we have to spend money on wallpaper and other materials. It's embarrassing. People do things for themselves. They spend money, and we spend it on the street. Maybe we'll stay at Grandma's for a while. What are you talking about? Stephen was indignant. A family should live separately, not under the supervision of the older generation. Neighborhood with relatives is not good for anyone. Believe me. Molly thought for a moment. She was uncomfortable in front of the people who had been renting her apartment for a year, making plans. Molly hadn't even hinted to them that she was going to get married soon and probably live in her parents' apartment. And now they had to deal with the situation. 2 months later, they registered the marriage. The wedding was modest, but Molly did not dwell on it. A whole week she and her grandmother went shopping, bought food for the festive table. The girl even had to take a vacation at her own expense to prepare everything properly. The owner of the salon, Adriana, did not like it. You bet, because to Molly, signed up for a manicure in advance and now had to postpone and even cancel the appointment of clients. But what can you do? The girl has a wedding. Once married, the young people began to live in Molly's apartment. 2 rooms were enough. In the small one, they arranged a bedroom, and in the big room, they hung a large flat-screen TV and put a new sofa, which they bought with gift money. Family life began. Actually, Molly thought that after the wedding, she and Stephen would spend at least a couple of weeks together, go somewhere to rest and organize something like a honeymoon. But the husband was against it. No time to relax. You have to work and earn money to buy a bigger apartment or even a house. You want us to have kids, don't you? Of course I do. Molly imagined how happy they would be with a daughter and a son running around the rooms. Here, where are we gonna put them in 2 rooms? We need everyone to have their own corner, not the right hand of everyone in a small apartment. Everything her husband said seemed right to Molly. But she did not leave a strange feeling, as if they were not creating a happy family and realize a business project. Stephen was constantly calculating, puzzling. From the very first days of their life together, he explained to Molly what a family budget is. My salary is bigger than yours, so I'll save it in a bank account. And we'll live on yours. It's not gonna be enough for anything else anyway. Yeah, I make a good living, Molly said in her defense. Don't argue. I know better. Do you know how much a car costs now? And when the kids come along, it's going to be a pain in the ass. Molly imagined Stephen taking her and the children in his own car to the countryside. It would be wonderful to spend time together in the fresh air. Stephen, as always, is right about saving money. Molly wasn't exactly wasteful before. Now she's learned to save money. She stopped buying herself new things. Groceries were cheaper. She'd almost given up cosmetics altogether. Stephen always said she was beautiful as she was, and plaster only ruins her skin. That's why women then have to spend money on plastic surgery. Molly had already spent very little of her own money, but her paycheck alone was still not enough. The money would run out a week before the next paycheck came in. Every time she started to mention this to her husband, he would change in his face. I don't understand where you spend the money. The man started to get agitated. We are with you, Truffaut. And oysters do not eat and restaurants do not go, and money all the time there is no. Groceries are expensive. Plus I have to pay the rent every month. And then my boots broke. I had to buy new ones. You could have had them repaired 5 times over. It would have been cheaper. Stephen raised his voice. Molly was silent, lowered her head. The man suddenly came to her, put his arm around her shoulders. But don't be offended, don't be afraid. I just want us to have everything in the future. And if we do not think about it now, then we will live in an old apartment and without a car. And you get more clients. Then we'll have enough to live on. I'm saving my paycheck. Molly never saw or knew how much her husband was saving. Stephen taught her to save on everything, telling her about a stable and trouble-free future, except he wasn't going to save on himself. At lunchtime, the man went to a restaurant, not to a canteen or cafe. As many other employees, he often took a cab home. And when Molly arrived with 2 bags of groceries in a car with checkers, he scolded and told her off. Are you crazy? You could take the bus back and forth to and from work for a week on that money. So the bags are heavy. Stephen made excuses for Molly. So what? So they're heavy. It's not like you're carrying them. You could have gotten on the bus and carried your bags. Molly suddenly got angry. You know what, Stephen? Then we'll go to the market and the grocery store together on the weekends to buy groceries for the week. I'm tired of carrying these bags. My arms were shaking with fatigue for an hour afterward, and my back still hurts. But no way, my weekends are restful. I have to work hard to provide for our family. So you can't touch my weekends. I have a legal right to lie on the couch, not run around the city with bags. That was the first time they ever fought. Molly realized that gradually all the domestic problems were being dumped on her head. Stephen did not become a support, although no one who knew him could say anything bad about him. Neighbors greeted him, politely paid him back. Wow, what kind of husband did Molly find? Always nice and sober. You can tell he's loaded. And her father was a real alcoholic. The neighbors were talking among themselves on the bench at the entrance. Molly and Stephen didn't really know anyone, though. They visited Nancy and Kevin once in a while. Sometimes they came to their house. Stephen didn't like that sort of thing. If you go out, you have to buy a cake at least. And that's a waste of money. If you invite them back to your place, you'll have to buy them food. Why would we do that? We're fine alone, he told Molly. So it was hard to argue. One day at work, Nancy asked Molly if you were going to have a party this weekend. What was the occasion? I don't get it, Molly. How don't you know? Blowing her eyes out at Nancy's friend Stephen, yours has successfully completed his probationary period and is now deputy director of the firm. Kevin told me yesterday. That's what I'm thinking. It's a great excuse to get together and celebrate. You know, Nancy, that Stephen's not a big fan of this sort of thing, right? Says Molly. She wondered why her husband hadn't told her. Listen, is his salary going to be bigger now? Why? He already got 50% more for last month, which was a probationary period. We're the ones Kevin was bragging about. Molly's throat felt cold inside, and an unpleasant lump came up. Her eyes darkened for a moment. She leaned back in her chair. Are you sick, girlfriend? Nancy was worried. Come and sit down. The girl sat Molly down on the chair, waved a magazine in front of her face to help Molly come to her senses. Why? Am I the only one who told you everything? I'm always minding my own business. I was grumbling to myself, Nancy. It's not about you, Molly said quietly. It's about me being pregnant. Oh, really? Asked her friend, stopping waving the magazine at this news. Does he know? No, not yet. I was gonna tell them today. Nancy's joyful surprise was suddenly replaced by thoughtfulness. She sat down next to Molly. Isn't it a bit early for you to have kids? Everyone's trying to get on their feet before they have kids. What are you talking about, Nancy? Children do not come from a purse with money, but from love. I really want my son to be as pretty as my little brother. I wish you were here right now. Oh, Molly, I don't think yours is going to like this news very much. I remember him talking about building a house, a car, buying the world on trips abroad, and then having children. In the evening after dinner, Molly decided to share with her husband the main news. Stephen, we will have a baby, she said, pressing herself against her husband, who sprawled on the sofa, watching TV. What did not immediately understand the meaning of what Stephen said. "I'm saying I'm pregnant," Molly repeated. "The baby will be a daughter or a son." The man turned to Molly, looked at her carefully. For a minute or two, the husband was silent. Molly even began to worry. And then he smiled and said, "Great news. I didn't think it would happen so soon. But maybe it's for the best." Of course it's for the best. Children are the joy of a family. "Listen," Molly Stephens got his wife a little too close to him. "How often do women have twins?" "I don't know. I mean, what are the odds of us having twins?" The man's eyes glistened like he found a treasure. "Actually, it depends on the stereotype. Those who have twins in their family have twins. And you had what, Molly? Twins, I'm asking. Did you have twins in your family?" Molly sensed an abnormal excitement in her husband's voice. "Not really," she answered uncertainly. "We didn't seem to have any either." "Oh, shit," he thought. And then he said, "It's just that if twins were born, we could get maternity capital right away. We need money for a new house." Molly looked at her husband in surprise. She didn't even think about it. Molly was more concerned with the fact of pregnancy. "You're funny. I should have just one baby and raise it. And you're having twins." She poked him in the forehead with the palm of her hand. "I'm not funny. I'm rational." "Why? To go to the maternity hospital twice, when you can shoot off at once." Stephen frowned. "Oh well, we'll have this one. And then with the second one we will not hesitate. We should not miss such an opportunity." Since the state began to pay money for the second child, that night Stephen was especially tender with Molly. She felt happy. Children change a lot of things in a family. So with the birth of their first child, petty disagreements and misunderstandings would disappear. That night she forgot to ask her husband about his new job and a raise. And she went home determined to ask him to allocate some amount of money for the household. It's time for Molly to update her closet. By fall, she needed new shoes and a new coat. The first few months of pregnancy, Molly was on wings. She felt like she had more energy. There was a lot of busy female clients at work. When they found out that Molly was pregnant, women congratulated her. And the owner of the salon, Adriana, also congratulated her. "True, added only who will now work. But you do not worry, Adriana. To you in your salon, anyone will gladly go to work." Molly tried to calm her down. "I don't need any more Azinico. I need a professional. And that the level is not lower than yours. And our clients love you too much. And I'm not going to be on maternity leave for long. I think I'm gonna get a job pretty soon. I have a grandmother. She'll take care of the baby. That would be really nice." Molly, very. And in the second half of the pregnancy, things started to go wrong. Molly began to gain weight, needed new comfortable clothes and shoes. But her husband was in no hurry to dress her. "Where do you have to go?" He would go to work, he said. "And there you sit at your table, no one to show off in front of. I just don't fit into old clothes. I don't feel comfortable in them. Soon, there won't be anything left to wear. We can't spend the money I'm saving now. You're earning money, so buy your own." Molly was upset. Just today, on her way home from work, she had spent everything she had left in her purse. But her husband was adamant. In order not to cause a scandal, Molly borrowed money from Nancy and bought herself a jacket the next day, 2 sizes too big. "Then I'll be able to walk in the woods all the way to spring, even when my belly gets really big," she decided. Although the jacket was not fashionable and did not suit her at all. Her friend only shook her head. "I don't understand why Stephen won't give you money. I saw him yesterday. He came into the restaurant at lunchtime." Nancy resented him. "He's got money for a good meal, but not for new clothes for his wife. Especially when you're carrying a baby under your heart. I wish I had a Kevin." Molly was tired of listening. How thoughtful Kevin is, that he spared no expense for his beautiful wife, buying her gold jewelry. And recently, she wanted a mink coat, and he, without hesitation, bought her a gorgeous app. Molly, aka Stephen from the already stingy and men turned into a real miser. Whatever she asked him for money for. Molly. He'd always refuse, saying it wasn't the time to splurge. And the last time his wife showed him a prescription from the gynecologist, he threw a tantrum and left, slamming the door. And all Molly needed to do was buy vitamins. Low hemoglobin. Adriana, the owner of the beauty parlor, began to point out Molly's appearance more and more often. She didn't like the look of an employee who took in rich clients. Have you seen our sign? It says beauty and beauty parlor. You see, everything from the decor to the employees has to breathe beauty. Everything here should be pleasing to the eye. Well, you tell me who's gonna come here if I have employees who look more like scarecrows than masters of active service. Clean yourself up, Molly. Otherwise, Nancy has also openly told a friend on more than one occasion that there is whispering in the salon. Rumor has it that Adriana wants to fire Molly, and the main reason is that she's not appropriate for the beauty salon view. Nancy has bailed Molly out time and time again with money. The girl tried to find something not too expensive, but decent. It was very difficult to do that. And when Stephen saw a new blouse on her, which went very well to his wife's eyes and covered her growing belly, again he made a scandal. I work like an ox. I work without a break, like a hard laborer, to make sure we have a good life. And you spend money left and right. You want vitamins, you want new clothes. If I'd known you were such a heel, I'd have thought 100 times about marrying you. Her husband's words hurt Molly. She didn't understand why she had to dress like Anish. Molly hadn't had her hair done for a long time because she didn't have enough money for it. She just ordered her hair at the back of her head to keep it out of the way. They had been living together for over a year now, and she still didn't have anything in her closet to brag about, not a single decent new piece. Molly had not told her grandmother or Nancy how they had celebrated their wedding anniversary. She was very embarrassed. Honey, do you remember that next weekend is our first wedding anniversary? Molly asked Stephen at dinner. Yes. Wow, time has flown by, he replied, pulling away from the cutlet. And how are we going to celebrate our first holiday together? Maybe we could go out together, like to a restaurant. Molly, you know I don't like that kind of thing. Restaurant food is very expensive, and we have to save money. Molly thought that they don't save money on themselves. The catered lunches are not the most upscale, but she decided to be persistent. She even made a resentful face. If you don't want to go to a restaurant, let's have dinner at home with your mom, Grandma Nancy. With Kevin, we could set a nice table and celebrate. Stephen disliked the idea of feeding guests at his own expense even more than going to a restaurant. He thought about how much a dinner party would cost and decided to give up, choosing the lesser of two evils. Let's make a deal, he said to Molly. We'll go to the restaurant together. After all, it's not good to miss our first family holiday, but everyone will pay for himself. Molly looked at her husband with surprise mixed with shock. But that I don't eat enough, and you're now as out of breath, sweeping everything off the table. It's not my fault that you eat a lot, so you pay for what you order in the restaurant. Molly didn't know what to say to such a suggestion, but she was so tired of being only at work and at home that she agreed. Molly called her grandmother and asked to borrow money until payday. But she said, sure, I'll give you the money, but not as a loan. It'll be my gift to you. For your first wedding anniversary, you buy yourself something dressy. Got it. Molly promised that she would spend the money her grandmother had given her on herself and not on groceries for her husband. She didn't bother to say they were going to a restaurant, but they would each pay for themselves. Grandma just wouldn't understand such an act from her husband on a sunny spring day. Molly and Stephen had a daughter, Adriana. The girl couldn't help but stare at the baby girl. The tiny newborn girl with blue eyes greedily sucked on the breast. Hungry, my baby. Eat. You'll be big and smart. Molly herself contented herself with what was given in the hospital canteen. The food left much to be desired, but she had to eat everything so that her milk would not be lost. Stephen came under the windows of the hospital the day after the birth, asking to see the baby. It seemed that he was not content to be the father of a daughter. Stephen had dreamed of a son, but he and Molly did not know until the last minute who would be born. At the checkup, it wasn't obvious. He said it was easier with boys, and they didn't have to spend a lot of money on outfits. They bought a couple jeans and t-shirts, and that was it. And Molly was happy about her daughter. Looking at the baby, she thought that very soon she would dress her up in pretty dresses and tie bows. However, she and her son would be glad no less. The main thing is that the child is healthy, eats well, and sleeps a lot. While Molly was standing at the window, showing her husband the baby, a nurse came into the room. She brought in a handout from Stephen. Molly put the girl down, opened the package. She was so hungry for something meaty. But her husband gave her oranges and apples. When the nurse saw the package, she shook her head. Who carries such fruit to nursing mothers? Apples would make the baby sick, and oranges would make her allergic. God forbid. Molly found in the bag. Also 2 bottles decided she was drinking tea. Soon they will be discharged with Adriana. At home, she will make herself a normal, hearty, and calorie-free food. On the appointed day, Molly was getting ready for discharge. She couldn't wait to let her husband hold the baby. He will take her in his arms and realize that she is a real treasure. The girl thought, looking at her daughter, who was wrapped in a beautiful blanket by the nurse. After learning that her granddaughter had given birth to a girl, she rushed to the store to buy a dowry. And by the time she was discharged, she gave Lenashka a blanket and a cute hat, so that the baby would be packed properly. At home, everyone looked at everything. Adriana, the girl, was sleeping peacefully in the crib. Stephen's mother looked for familiar features. Well, she didn't look anything like little Stephen. He was dark, and she was quite light, blue-eyed. The baby looks like herself. Clara interrupted her. If everyone looked like their fathers, there would be clones of them all over the world. They say that children from the parting of the reconciliation, Molly added. At first, they may resemble their mom, but when they grow up, they become like their dad or even go to their grandmother. I don't know where I was born. All around just said that he looks like his father, sparkled. Mother-in-law Molly. And Stephen was like he didn't care at all. He carried the little girl around the room in his arms for a while and then gave her to her mother. She's still a baby. What would he do with her? Stephen didn't get any more generous with the birth of his daughter. He still skimped on every little thing. Molly received child benefit, but it was woefully inadequate. Every time she asked her husband for money, he became more and more angry. He was also unhappy that the baby cried at night. I have to work in the morning. I'll calm her down, he hissed. He was sleeping through his sleep on Molly, not letting her sleep properly, and Adriana started teething. The girl became restless, ate poorly, and slept little. She only calmed down on walks. That's why Molly tried to walk outside with a stroller. Grandma, stay here with Adriana. I'll run to the store, Molly asked Clara. She ran to get some formula milk. There wasn't enough milk. The poor nutrition was taking its toll. The grandmother saw it all. Pitying her granddaughter, she advised her more than once to leave, dearie, to live as a nurse. What can't we do? She brought you up alone and raised you on your feet. And here you and I are going to raise a little girl alone. It's not good to leave your daughter without a father. Maybe things will get better, Molly said with a hope that was fading by the day. Grandmother was the only support for the young mother. Despite her frequent bad health, she would go to Molly to help with the baby, and sometimes even gave her a chance to sleep. Seeing that Molly was getting very tired, her husband didn't help at all. He was often late at work, and lately he suddenly had some business trips. One day he left for a few days, and without even coming home. Right from work, I'm leaving for a few days on a business trip. That's all Stephen said on the phone. For how long? Molly asked. No, just for a week. What about Adriana and me alone? Tell your grandmother to come and help you. Stephen, I don't have any money. I have to buy diapers and formula for the baby. Molly knew he was gonna start telling her that she was feeding her daughter, that she changed her diapers too often. And in general, when he was a baby, no diapers were not bought. Somehow we did without. But my husband, for the first time in many months, did not scream and did not begin to reproach Molly for wastefulness. I left some money on the shelf in the hallway for you to buy what you need. Come back soon. That's all Molly had time to say. Stephen had already hung up the phone, looking at the few bills her husband had left for her and her daughter. Molly wondered how to spend them properly. She would have a whole week to get by on those pennies. Molly called her grandmother, wanting to invite her to stay with her for the time Stephen would be away. "I'm sick," Molly replied in a weak voice. "What's wrong with you?" "It is known that the pressure. Yesterday a neighbor called an ambulance. They gave me a shot. They wanted to take me to the hospital. I refused. How can I leave you, Adriana? I'll lie down for a while and come back. Stephen's away on a business trip, and I wanted you to stay with me for a week. I'd like to keep an eye on you. Come on, Vanya. You'd have to deal with Adriana on your own. And now you have to take care of me, a sick old woman." Molly was worried about her grandmother. Her blood pressure had been spiking a lot lately, and the old meds weren't working. "I had to go to the district therapist, but Grandma couldn't do it alone, and Molly had no time at all. She'd follow up for a few days and get back on her feet. As long as I'm alive, I won't leave Molly." She thought and went to see her granddaughter and great-granddaughter. "As long as Molly's alive, I won't give up," she thought. And she walked to her granddaughter and her great-granddaughter. Carrying in a bag of simple groceries, Grandmother knew at home Molly's refrigerator was almost always empty. "How can Stephen not see that you sit here hungry all day long? Where would he put the money?" She resented him, putting on the table cereals, sausage, a loaf of fresh wheat bread. "He wants to build a big house so that we can live in it and raise our children. I see what kind of educator he is. He hardly ever comes near his daughter. He's so tired." Grandma justified her husband. "Molly works a lot." "No, not the kind of husband you need." Grandma shook her head. "Where did my eyes go when I blessed you with this marriage, Grandma? But Stephen doesn't drink or beat me." It was the argument Molly always used to soothe herself in moments of resentment toward Stephen. In her memory, there were memories of her drunken father chasing her mother around the apartment, how he beat her severely, and she hid in a small room with a chip. That's how it is. Molly's mom and little brother never knew one never went hungry. The father gave money, leaving himself only enough to drink, but the mother suffered from beatings all the time. And Molly knew from childhood that a drunk man was dangerous. You have to stay away. Stephen, on the other hand, doesn't take a drop in his mouth. Not even on holidays. But he was a hammer, like nothing I've ever seen before. What's true is true. Your Stephen doesn't drink, and that's good. Clara rocked Adriana in her arms. You'd think with a life like that, what's better? What are you saying, Grandma? Molly was indignant at Clara's words. If Daddy hadn't drunk, hadn't hurt Mommy, we'd all be together now. I never would have lost my baby brother. I loved Robert so much. I still have that picture. The girl went to the shelf, where in a simple plastic frame stood the photograph that her grandmother had found in a letter from her daughter. Molly looked sadly at her mother and little Robert on her lap. What was wrong with them now? Are they alive? What if they are in need? What if they're starving? But don't think about that. Her grandmother interrupted her. Your mother, if she's alive, won't be lost. And she certainly won't make Robert starve. It's just not time. It's not time yet. For what? She was silent, and then reached into Adriana Molly's neck to put her in her crib. Her husband returned from his business trip in a surprisingly good mood. He played with Adriana while Molly sorted through the gift bags. There were baby things, even a paycheck, and some groceries, obviously not from their neighborhood store. Stephen, what a beautiful dress. It's a little big though, but my daughter is growing up fast. Soon she'll be able to wear it. Yes, I picked it out myself. My husband said proudly. It's expensive, but it's for my daughter. There and look at the toys for her, funny. She took out animals, rattles, letters on the magnetic ABCs. Then why should she still to learn letters to grow and grow? Molly will grow up, and we won't even know she's grown up. Stephen smiled, and Molly rejoiced. She hadn't seen her husband in such a good mood in a long time. And then everything goes up in price. We have to stock up. I went to the bakery and bread is 2 more expensive again. Should we buy a bag of flour? You're gonna bake it yourself in the oven. Everything's cheaper. I don't have time to bake. I'm with the baby all the time. Grandma will help, said Stephen. By the way, you had her. She helped, but she's very sick. Stephen seems to have missed those words. Let's get your daughter ready. I'll take her for a walk in the yard. Meanwhile, you cook something special for dinner. You got groceries. I got a whole bag of groceries. Molly was pleased. Stephen was generally reluctant to take care of Adriana. He was going for a walk with his daughter. She quickly dressed the baby, came down the stairs following her husband, who rolled out the stroller. Everything will get better. We'll live like people, she thought, looking out the window as her husband and daughter walked along the fictitious tile path. Molly picked up her cell phone, swiped her finger across the screen to look up dinner ideas online on social media. On her page, she saw photos sent in. The picture showed a smiling Stephen in swim trunks and a girl in a bright pink swimsuit. They were standing under a palm tree on a beach with golden sand. Molly's heart raced. What did that mean? Her husband wasn't on any business trip, but was vacationing at a resort. And who is this girl? A casual acquaintance, or was he vacationing with her? A mistress. When her husband and daughter returned from their walk, Molly undressed the little girl and began to set the table. She didn't know how to bring up the fact that an explicit picture had appeared on her page. Molly set the table, seated her daughter next to a tall, high chair for feeding. Satisfied, her husband flew away from the beer and mashed potatoes. Oh, and I missed home-cooked meals. Stephen really hardly ever ate at home, more often at restaurants. He said he'd starve to death before he got home, so he had to eat in cafes. Do you know what this is? Molly asked, pointing to the photo on her phone. Stephen silently stared, and the girl waited for him to start explaining. But the husband didn't even think of embarrassing himself or making excuses. Wow, that really came out well. He asked his wife. Where are you? And who are you with? Asked Molly. What's your business? Yeah, I went on vacation. Stephen jumped up from the table. His voice became cold again. You know why? Because I need a vacation. I work hard to earn money for us to live a normal life. I work like an ox, so that you do not need anything in the future. I save on everything. I can afford a vacation once in a while. You don't work hard. You stay at home all day. I'm with our baby, so I don't work. Molly tried to justify herself. There's no reason to cover for a baby mommy's been sending her to daycare for a year and a half, or let the grandmother sit with her. Am I the only one who doesn't feed you with your appetites? No, look at you. I work every day, earn money, and she finds time to sit on social networks and follow me. Molly did not have time to say that she was not following her husband, that the photo was sent to her and someone unknown, but he had already slammed the door and shouted, I'm going for a walk. I've ruined it again. The evening was off to such a good start. Molly thought as she cleared the dirty dishes from the table. She decided that tomorrow she would go to the beauty parlor to find out about the maternity leave. I don't have any vacancies at all. Indifferently, looking at the former employee, who was the best master of active service a year and a half ago, said Adriana, I have nowhere to take you. Molly, maybe just for a few hours. I had my own clients. I could work with them. That's completely impossible. The boss disapprovingly looked at the girl's old suit and also noticed the lack of good makeup and dull complexion. I was gonna call you myself to give you a letter of resignation. I don't need employees with small children. Babies get sick a lot. On her way out of the salon, Molly ran into an old friend, Nancy. Mother, why are you here? She was surprised. Yes, I wanted to go back to work. Suggested I quit my job altogether. Soon the nannies will stop paying the allowance. Without money, it's going to be very hard. And I thought you didn't need money, said Nancy. Light a thin cigarette. My Kevin said Stephen just bought a trip to Turkey last month. You, girlfriend, you don't look at all like just that soon. Molly did not tell Nancy that her husband did not go on vacation with her, that she still needed money, and now she had lost her job, which used to bring her a good income. In the evening, Stephen asked Molly if she had gone to the salon. She had, she said as she poured tea for her husband. When you go to work, they won't take me. They offered to quit, the wife replied sadly. Well, here we are. Stephen threw a spoon on the table. Are you going to sit on my neck until retirement? I feed you, I clothe you, I pay the rent. It's all out of my pocket. It's not a long way to go with you. How much do you spend on us? Molly tried to argue. You count your own. Don't mess with my wallet. I have everything thought out in my life. Everything will go to work. I am trying, beating, to build my own house, to rest at resorts, a car to buy, in general, so as you want to get out of it. Take a job at home, and adds, what do you do? A manicure at home is enough at the end of the day. I'm sick of your freeloaders. Everything Stephen said was hurtful to Molly. She was ready to cry from hopelessness, from self-pity, but suddenly her cell phone rang. Molly's excited voice spoke, neighbor, hurry up and come to your grandmother in the ambulance to the hospital. Molly quickly dressed on the go, explaining to her husband that she had to go to the hospital. She put her daughter on his lap and ran out the door. She got home a couple hours later. Grandma had died, Molly said quietly, forestalling her husband's questions with a heart attack. After the funeral, Molly sat at the kitchen window, watching the sun sink behind the trees. She had lost the last person close to her. Her husband never became her family, and lately he had become distant. He was always away on business trips. On the one hand, the girl was calmer when he was not at home. On the other hand, she had no money for food. If Stephen did not go anywhere, then at least bought food, from which Molly cooked food. He was not going to starve himself. 6 months later, Molly took over the inheritance. She inherited the apartment. Stephen rubbed his hands together, looking at the inheritance certificate. You know what I've decided? Molly said. He put his arm around his wife. We'll sell your apartments and start building a house. I've already looked at a plot of land outside the city, but it's quiet, and the air is fresh. Molly imagined a beautiful big house with an adjoining territory, where there would be a playground for Adriana and a lot of flowers. But where would we live while the house was being built? She worried. Maybe we shouldn't sell a house. You've been saving almost your entire paycheck to start construction. How many times have I told you to stay out of my wallet? The money I'm saving, we're gonna need for the house. We'll need to buy furniture. And to live in the country, we need a car. Besides, it's my money. I earned it with my own labor. Shouldn't you be contributing to the house? Molly sighed heavily. She was not ready to lose her parents' and grandmother's apartment overnight. Seeing his wife's doubt, Stephen changed his tone. Don't worry. We'll rent a spacious apartment for the construction period and live there for a while. But in a year, we'll move into a new house. Can you imagine how nice it'll be for our daughter? Her own yard, and she'll have her own room. Stephen always knew just what to push. Molly would do anything if her daughter's well-being depended on it. They sold the apartment quickly, but on Molly Housing, inherited from her parents, the buyer was not found for a long time. Molly did not see the money from the sale of her grandmother's apartment. Her husband said that he put them in his account, and from there they will go to pay for the construction of the house. One evening, Stephen took a suitcase out of the pantry and started packing. Where are you going? Molly asked in a whisper. The daughter and the girl were asleep in the room. I was afraid to wake her up. I'm going on a business trip for a long time. A week and a half. The bosses are sending me. I see. Molly thought her husband needed another vacation, but she didn't want to get into a fight. He'd come back anyway. After such business trips, he became kind, attentive, even caring for a few days. At least leave us some money. We're running low on groceries. I also ran out of money for cell phones. Stephen V. took it and frowned. He seemed to be calculating something in his mind. I don't have any extra money. It's all set aside for construction. Get a job. How many times do I have to tell you? You don't even need money for a cell phone. Why don't you stop surfing social media and stalking me? But how would I be able to call you if I did? Molly got worried. You don't have to call me when I'm on a business trip. I'll call you myself. And incoming calls on your tariff are free. Alone at home, Molly thought about how to earn money. She took a notebook and a cell and a pen and wrote a handwritten advertisement for an active service master. At the end, she included her phone number. While Adriana slept, Molly went downstairs and posted the papers on the entryway doors of her house. When she returned, she retrieved her tools from her room: orange sticks, cheeses, manicure bit scissors, tweezers to provide a minimal service. That's enough. And there were very few nail polishes left. Some were shoved in altogether and went to the trash can. But that's okay. We'll last a few days. And then maybe someone will apply for an ad. Molly hoped, but no one called tomorrow or the day after. Standing at the windowsill, she watered the indoor plants she had brought from her grandmother's apartment. The flowers had time to wilt, but care and care did their job. Fresh leaves appeared. Only plants can live on water alone. What about Adriana and me? Molly thought. The water in the small watering can she use to water the flowers? The flowers had run out. Molly moved the flower pot to the coffee table and went into the bathroom to put the container under the sink. Adriana was playing with toys on the floor. Suddenly, Molly heard a loud wheezing sound. She ran into the room. Her daughter was lying on the floor wheezing. She was desperately gasping for breath. Her body had become absorbent cotton. Molly grabbed the phone in a panic, started dialing the number of the ambulance. The girl remembered that she had no money on her phone, so she would not be able to call the doctors, not knowing what to do. The girl grabbed the panting rod in her arms, ran out of the apartment without even getting dressed, and quickly went downstairs. She ran out to help, saw a car stopped in front of her driveway. "Please help," Molly screamed. "My daughter is suffocating." The driver jumped out of the car. He was a young, well-dressed guy in his 20s. "What's wrong with her?" "I don't know. She's choking," Molly screamed. "Get in quickly," said the guy and opened the back door of the car. "Tell me where to go." "I'm not from around here." Molly was pointing the way to the hospital, but she was just praying that she could get the girl there in time. Adriana had stopped squeaking, barely breathing. "My little one, now be patient. We'll be there in time to help you." The car stopped at the steps of the emergency room. The guy opened the car door, took the girl Molly from his arms. "Where to?" he asked, and he was already hurrying to the front door. Molly rushed after him. "Help! The baby's sick. My daughter is choking," Molly shouted for help. Within seconds, the girl was placed on a gurney and wheeled away. Molly and the strange guy were left alone in an empty room. The girl was in a state of shock and didn't notice that there was someone else next to her. She sat down on a chair against the wall, covered her face with her hands, and cried quietly. "Calm down. Everything will be all right." The unfamiliar man put his arm around her shoulders. Only now did she begin to perceive what was happening realistically. He had helped her without even asking what had happened. He helped her without asking too much. The girl looked at the stranger with gratitude. "Thank you," she said. "There's no reason not to thank." The guy replied, "And you're all shivering." He took off his outer garment and carefully covered Molly's shoulders. For a while they sat in silence. Molly couldn't understand what had happened to her daughter. All day she had been calm, playing with her toys. There was no sign of a cold. She didn't complain of a tummy ache. Suddenly, there's this terrible wheeze. "How old is your girl?" unexpectedly asked the guy, immersed in his thoughts. Molly completely forgot about him. 1 year and 9 months, she answered. Why didn't you leave? Thank you so much for helping me, but you should probably get on with your business. She started to pull off the stranger's jacket, but he put it back on her shoulders with a warning movement. Don't worry, I'm in no hurry at all. In fact, it's important that I know what's going on with your baby. I'm kind of in charge of her now. I'll be honest, I was really scared for the girl and for you. You had that look. The guy gave Molly his hand. I'm Robert. Molly smiled faintly and held out her hand. His palm was warm. The light shake cheered the girl up. I was really scared. Adriana is my only and favorite daughter. I don't know what will happen to me if something happens to her. She'll be fine. There's doctors here. They're gonna help. Robert tried to reassure her. Thank you. Molly looked into his eyes. They were the same sky blue color as her daughter's. Are you the girl's parents? The doctor asked. He looked about 40 years old. Molly stood up, unable to even ask what was wrong with Adriana. Silently, she looked at the doctor. Yes, we brought her here, answered Robert instead of the girl. And it's good that we brought her ourselves. They were waiting for an ambulance. I'm afraid we wouldn't have been able to save her in time. Molly felt the doctor's words making her legs shrink. The doctor noticed her agitation and hurried to reassure her. Everything is already fine. Don't worry so much. Your daughter had a severe allergy attack. We pumped her stomach. Apparently, the allergic shock was caused by a plant leaf she swallowed. Now we've given her a shot. She'll lie down for a while, and you can take her home. And in the future, try to keep an eye out what the child is putting in her mouth. Molly realized that Adriana had reached for the flower she had left on the coffee table. I'll throw it away. As soon as I get home, Molly thought to herself. For 2 hours she sat in the emergency room, and the guy who had helped her out in a dangerous moment was there when Adriana was carried out by a nurse. Molly jumped up from her chair, rushed to hug the little girl, but she only flapped her eyes. Tears sprang from the mother's eyes. Her Adriana is alive. She's all right now. Robert drove them home, stopped the car in front of the driveway. I don't know how to thank you, Molly said. And you can make me some tea, he said, smiling. I'm craving something hot. Well, let's go. Molly headed for the entryway, thinking that she had nothing for tea. At least there was some brew in the tin. Come in, invited the girl. Robert pushed open the front door. In her haste, she had left it unlocked. The guest, undressed, went into the room, looking at the furnishings in the car. Adriana had fallen asleep. Apparently that was the effect of the medication she had been given at the hospital. Molly tiptoed into the bedroom, put her to bed, and returned to Robert. I'll put the kettle on now. The boy nodded in response. She returned to the room a few minutes later, carrying 2 cups of tea and sugar on a tray. On the bottom it still had a little sweetening left for. You'll have to excuse me. I have nothing to treat you to guiltily, she pronounced, and set the tray on the table. That's okay. And let's use your first name, Robert suggested. After all, today we saved a child. And such feats should bring us closer together. She really felt that this guy she didn't know had become very close to her in a few hours. Come on, let's go, said Molly and laughed softly. Robert took a sip from his cup and looked around. Suddenly, his gaze stopped on a framed photograph that stood on the shelf next to the TV. He stood up and came closer. May I? Robert asked, pointing at the picture. Yes, of course. He sat down again, holding the framed picture of Molly, her parents, and her little brother. Is this your family? He asked. Yes, but no one is around anymore, Molly replied. Suddenly, the guy got up and went to the hallway. When he came back, he opened his wallet and took out a small photo. Look, it's me. He held out a snapshot of the girl from the picture as a child, her little brother Robert looking at her. Only he was a little older than Molly remembered him. She looked perplexed, looking at the picture and at Robert, and he was smiling. That's me. A long time ago, my mom ran abroad from this town from my dad. He threatened her with a knife. My mother said he drank heavily and beat her, so she had to go into hiding. Recently I turned 20 years old, and my mother told me everything about her past. By then she was already sick. Oncology. Robert was quiet for a while. Molly looked at the boy in the picture and thought she was having a strange dream. She couldn't help but notice that Robert was in the family photo. And that boy is the same person. I always knew I had a grandmother, a father, and an older sister in Russia. When my mom was dying, she asked me to find my grandmother and my sister Molly. So when I buried her, I came here. Robert found Grandma's house. I wanted to talk to her first, but the neighbor said that the old lady died not so long ago, and the apartment is for sale. She also told me that my sister lived in my parents' old apartment. Robert continued. I knew the street name of the city and the house number by heart from childhood, but the apartment number just slipped my mind. And my grandmother's neighbor didn't know it, so I decided I'd find my sister, even if there are 1,000 apartments in this building. I got to the house, and there you are, running out with your daughter in your arms. Molly looked at the guy and couldn't believe this was happening to her. Is this really her brother Robert? It turns out it is, but it's so unbelievable, I can hardly believe it's happening. I thought they'd go door to door. And I asked people in the courtyard, and I find my sister. He looked at Molly with a look of warmth and joy, and she was completely speechless. The boy and the girl hugged tightly, two loved ones separated. Scientists for almost 20 years were close to each other again. Tears were flowing down their cheeks. They were tears of joy and happiness. The unexpected meeting completely changed Molly's life. All week her brother was close to her, not a minute away from her and her little niece. They took walks together, went shopping. Robert liked to please his sister Adriana to buy her little girl toys and beautiful things, and when they got home, they would cook dinner together. Our mother loved to cook dumplings, making so many of them that sometimes they didn't fit in the freezer. Then she would take them out on the balcony. In the wintertime, there were a few boards there. The brother and sister felt happy. Molly had forgotten that her husband would be back soon while he was away. She talked a lot about her life, about how Stephen constantly reproaches her with a piece of bread and does not give her money for groceries. The girl did not complain, but simply answered her brother's questions and constantly tried to justify her husband. You see, he is very frugal. He wants to build us a house. That's why he saved all the money. And now we've sold Grandma's apartment and put it on the market. Sister, will you stay on the street with a husband like that? It was obvious to Robert that her husband was just screwing around to make a profit at her expense while he was living for his own pleasure. One day, Robert suddenly went somewhere. Will you be gone long? My sister asked. I think not, he replied, stretching his jacket. When will I be back? Let's go for a walk. The weather's great. Frost and sunshine, like Pushkin. By the time Robert returned, Molly had managed to feed and collect Adriana. They dressed warmly and went for a walk. Everyone was having fun. But Molly had one question, and she finally decided to ask her brother, Are you going away? I'll be alone again. He looked at her carefully, hugged her, and said, Let's talk about this a little later. Not now. Molly, Robert, and Adriana returned home in the evening. They had a great time at the entertainment center, where there were rides for the kids. Then they sat in the coffee shop with the door to the hallway open. Molly saw her husband's suitcase. Stephen is back, she said. Her husband's voice came from the room. Molly, you hurry up. We have to pack. Stephen came out to meet his wife and daughter. Who's this? Meet Stephen. This is my brother Robert. He came from out of the country to find me. I told you I had a brother, but I didn't know where he was. Robert found me. The man looked at the boy with a blank stare, as if he were nothing. Come on in, we'll be packing faster. I sold the apartment. While you're living in a communal apartment, I've rented a room there. I'll move in with my mom while our house is being built. We'll all be cramped in the communal room. Hurry up, Molly. What are you standing there for? She doesn't have to hurry. Robert suddenly entered the conversation. But you, man, You can go to your mother's house. Listen, you little brat. Shut up and mind your own business. Stephen snapped at him, not realizing what was going on. Molly looked from her husband to her brother. Your husband sold the apartment under the power of attorney you signed. He didn't intend to build a house, and he certainly didn't have you and your daughter in his plans. I was able to find that out during my time in the city. It wasn't hard. Stephen is as naked as a falcon. He doesn't have any savings that he's been telling you about. He just wanted to get his hands on your money, just like he got his hands on the money from selling our grandmother's apartment. And the day before yesterday, I bought that apartment from the realtors, and now it's mine. The guy pulled out a piece of paper and showed it to Molly and her husband. And then Robert opened the door and put Stephen's suitcase in the stairwell. As the saying goes, where here Robert pointed the money with his hand at the door, or for the particularly uneducated, get out, or should I call the police? Stephen had no choice but to leave. Robert gave Molly the deeds to the apartment, took Adriana in his arms, hugged his sister, and said, now you and I have two homes, mine abroad and yours here. You choose where you want to live. Wherever you are, smiling, the sister replied. Now she felt that everything would be fine next to her beloved younger brother.
Anthony was always a man of integrity and fairness. More than anything else, he valued loyalty. Loyalty to people, loyalty to his favorite business, loyalty to his own principles. After earning his first big money and opening a security agency, Anthony realized that truly loyal people are disastrously few. Once loyal partners betrayed him, smelling even more money elsewhere, and former enemies smiled falsely in the face when they realized that Anthony is now really rich. Even his beloved wife once betrayed the man on one of the most ordinary days. Anthony, unexpectedly returning from a business trip, caught his wife with another man, caught in her own bed. He found her in a way he'd never seen his modest wife before. But the betrayed husband is a soft, cordial, and straightforward man. After a while, he forgave the unfaithful one. His wife, Kelly, was once an orphan and a stranger. Throw her out of the house, she'd have nowhere to go. Anthony managed to find the strength to forgive the woman he once loved, or to forgive her only in words. In any case, it remained a mystery to everyone. However, since that day, the couple's life had changed markedly. No longer could he look into the eyes of his Kelly. No longer could he trust anyone. Since that day, he devoted his life to a new friend, or rather, a dog named Remy. The Cocker Spaniel dog became more than just a pet. He became his loyal friend. The kind of friend he never dreamed of. Anthony. He became his companion. He became his companion. Remy brought together all the qualities that Anthony so desperately tried to find in people. He tried to find loyalty in his friends, in his business partners, in his relatives, in his wife. Who would have thought that all the immense love and loyalty that a man who was already not old enough to dream so much about, he would be able to find in a dog from day one? Taking time out of the kennel, Anthony realized it was fate. From the moment Kelly cheated on her husband, he couldn't even look in her direction in peace, nor could he divorce her. After all, she begged him not to kick her out, and he decided to move to different parts of their large country house. The space allowed. And now Anthony had only one love, one affection, his faithful spaniel Remy. He was not only the man's best friend, he was his ally. Remy made a great hunter, and Anthony had been interested in hunting since he was a child. After all, both his father and even his grandfather were passionate about the hobby. And so the next 12 years passed in love and understanding. Anthony had already retired, but every hunting season he and Remy met in full readiness. Ronca was an obedient, loyal dog. He knew many commands. He picked up waltz, spikes, and partridges the first time. He immediately found game and brought it to his beloved master. The last 12 years were the best years of Anthony's life. After all, they had passed together with those a lonely terror rolled down the old man's cheek. "You were my best friend," Anthony said quietly, hardly restraining himself from bursting into tears. You were my friend, you were my family. He turned away from the small bundle in which the already dead old Remy lay, no longer able to look at his departed friend. There was a lump in his throat. He felt dizzy. How will I be without you? He asked quietly. Ah, it's just a dog. Anthony squeamishly wrinkled Kelly's nose. They buried it as if it were a human being. Wake up, it's just a dog. She continued to resent it. You should have loved your wife like that, Anthony. Didn't even turn his head toward his wife. Get out, he said sternly. I'm not going anywhere. She continued to resent him. I want to know what kind of circus you're running here, for God's sake. The older man simply repeated what he had said earlier. Come out a little louder, he said. You're not worth half of my Remy. Without making a sin of it, let's just leave the funeral. Kelly rolled her eyes demonstratively. You're welcome. She shouted and took a quick step toward the exit of the small cemetery where pets were buried in this expensive village. Kitty goths, she lamented to herself, all dancing to his tune while he went crazy. I wish someone would tell him it's not normal. She thought. Kelly was a solid, well-fed woman. She had met Anthony when she was 25 and he was 28. It probably couldn't be said that Kelly had ever really loved her husband. She probably didn't know how to love at all. After moving to the big city and having nothing but good looks, Kelly went looking for a wealthy man, looking for someone who could provide for her life. Kelly grew up in an orphanage. She grew up in horrible, even inhumane conditions. Maybe that's why she didn't know how to love. Maybe that's why she only saw people as tools for her own ends. Maybe she did, or maybe it was just because she was such a cold, calculating person, devoid of empathy. When Kelly reached adulthood, she sold the room in the communal apartment that she had gotten from the state and immediately invested all the money in her appearance, moving to the big city. Kelly began to search for a husband rich and successful. From 18 to 25, Kelly changed a lot of men, but all of them were not what she wanted. It wasn't until she met Anthony that she realized this was the one for her. Initially, Kelly had a very different goal in mind. A young businessman, owner of a decent business, immediately attracted her attention, and Kelly was already beginning to generalize him. Then his personal security guard caught her eye. Strong, a little clumsy, but very kind guard Anthony. The girl immediately realized this man was a gold mine. Being a calculating person, Kelly was able to see the potential in the guard. She saw immediately this man will succeed, and leaving attempts to generalize the businessman, engaged in his guard Anthony. Kelly had a special gift, namely she was able to easily read the personality of other people and easily copy their behavior, thereby enticing her prey. Oh, you're a security guard? I love hunting, she said, naively batting her eyes on the first date. My dream is to marry a hunter. The thick, wild woods. The smell of gunpowder, fresh, hand-caught meat. How I love it all, she said. No wonder Anthony, though in those years he was still just Anthony, fell in love with the young and beautiful Kelly. Thinking she was his destiny, the couple married 6 months after meeting. And 3 years later, Anthony opened his own security firm. Kelly got what she wanted. She became the wife of a rich and successful man. True, from his hobbies and interests, she was literally sick of it. She hated nature, giving her preference to city life, hated long hikes, hated sleeping in tents, hated dogs and birds. She didn't like animals in general. Basically, she hated everything she loved so much. Her husband. However, divorce was out of the question. For the fortune hunter's main goal was not just a rich husband. Her main goal was an inheritance. Kelly hoped that sooner or later Anthony would die. She dreamed of how the unloved spouse accidentally shot on the hunt, and his business and real estate will go to her. She dreamed of an inheritance. But Anthony had no intention of giving his soul to God. So the day Kelly was caught cheating, she fell at her husband's feet, begging him not to leave her. After all, she didn't just have nowhere to go, and was desperately sorry for all the long years she had wasted on Anthony. Anthony forgave his wife, but stopped sleeping in the same bed with her, and for the next 12 years, the couple hardly spoke to each other, only occasionally crossing paths within the walls of the new family member's big house. Kelly hated it with every fiber of her dark soul. After all, it was Remy who now lived in her bedroom. It was Remy who shared a bed with Anthony. It was Remy who had gotten the best benefits. It was Remy who had invested so much time and money, while Kelly was living in her house as a live-in, not a full-time wife anymore. Yes, Anthony did not kick her out of the house, but he had lost all interest and, most importantly, respect for her. No longer did he look at her with a loving gaze. No longer did he adore his wife. She often wondered if the affair had been worth what her life had become. Cheating, of course, had no answer to that question. In fact, she had been unfaithful to Anthony since the first year of their marriage. Who knew that on that day her spouse would return on time from a business trip? The sense of shame had never entered this woman's soul. It was basically inaccessible to her. Kelly rather lived by instinct. A sense of pleasure in satisfying her needs, a sense of self-importance. That's all. The three pillars of her personality. Compassion, love, loyalty. All of those things were nothing to her. All Kelly had to do now was wait in silence for Anthony to leave this world and inherit his legacy. But the man seemed to grow stronger every day. Idiots, idiots, half-voicedly scolded the predator. Sitting behind the wheel of the SUV, she was heading toward home and could not understand how anyone could run around with a simple dog like that. She couldn't understand why her husband bought expensive toys for the dog. Why he had built a whole enclosure for some dog? It's a dog. He belongs on a leash outside the house. She was indignant as Anthony poured a bowl of clean water for Remy. Let him eat the snow. This attitude toward a simple dog, though quite expensive, was alien and hateful to her. And after Remy's death, when she saw that Anthony was going to give the dog a real funeral, it was beyond her comprehension. What nonsense! She thought with all her might, pushing the gas pedal part of the way down the deserted highway that ran through the dense forest. How much do I hate all this? Meanwhile, the funeral was coming to an end, and the small coffin was already being lowered into the ground. Anthony, though he did not show it, was depressed as he had never been depressed in his life. His soul was torn. His heart ached with longing. Even the day he had learned that his spouse had been unfaithful to him, he had not been in such pain. Though he died his death of old age, the pain of his loss didn't get any weaker. The pain of losing his best friend. That's what the unfortunate man felt. He seemed to be in a delirium. The whole world was a hazy, foggy blur, and he couldn't be in that world all alone. When the coffin was lowered, the workers had already begun to bury the grave. A strong male hand rested on Anthony's shoulder. "I'm sorry," quietly said a man who approached unnoticed. It was Benjamin, a hunter with whom Anthony often went into the field and a good acquaintance. Benjamin, like his companion, loved dogs. He also had his own dog kennel. Benjamin was involved in breeding one of the most beautiful hunting breeds, the Red Irish Setter. His simple hobby and love for dogs led him to his life's work. His kennel was considered one of the. In the country, the pedigree of his dog went far back to the origins of this breed. The dogs from his kennel were true role models. Invariably took prizes at exhibitions and field trials, those who wanted to buy a faithful friend. He had so many that the owner of the kennel chose the buyers himself, conducting tests and various checks. Benjamin was one of the few people Anthony wanted to see at his Remy's funeral. Many of those who attended such an unusual event were surprised, to say the least. Many did not understand the motives of the unrestrained man. Why bury the dog at all? Thought an elderly woman housekeeper living at Anthony's house. They could have just buried it in the woods. The young workers at the security agency owned by Anthony were also surprised. They shifted from foot to foot, embarrassed by the superior's universal sadness. Only fellow hunters, including Benjamin, could understand the unhappy owner. Benjamin cleared his throat. "I understand how much it hurts," he said, still keeping his hand on the hunter's shoulder. "Hold on, thank you," Anthony replied melancholically. "Thank you for coming. Never mind." He waved away, about to leave the small graveyard, as suddenly his companion squeezed his shoulder tighter. "Tell me, Anthony, do you need to talk?" he said with pressure. "The main thing is not to worry about the wife of the woman they know. I have not worried about her for a long time. Just as quietly answered Anthony, stopping to continue the conversation. It's just that I feel something, that longing. Hopelessness. Not just that. The man smiled indignantly. When Remy was gone, I felt my life go with him. I know fading away. I can't explain it. Even before I knew for sure that Remy was no longer alive, I felt something so strange, as if my heart had lost something important, as if something had chipped away from it, leaving this world. I feel like I'm only dying after Remy. Anthony's buddy's eyes went wide. Anthony, come on. It's the pain, the loss. Believe me, I know what I'm talking about. He was embarrassed, adjusting his shirt. You're not dying, brother. You're gonna be okay. I don't need pity. Anthony replied grimly. I shared with you how I feel without Remy. I don't see the point of living without him anymore. Oh, how I am without him. Tears froze in his eyes and orphaned him. The man quickly turned away from his interlocutor. He felt that if anyone saw his weakness, it would damage his reputation, bringing him into disrepute. My dog was a loyal companion. There's no one else like him. You need a new dog, Benjamin said, nodding his head reassuringly. Yes, that's right. A loyal, faithful dog. By the way, I have a new addition to my kennel very soon. Many puppies are already booked, but for you, I think I'll single out a male or a female. Which one do you want? One of ours. A bitch is pregnant. She's about to breed. Anthony shook his head at that puppy. He's not gonna be my Remy. No one can ever replace him for me. No offense, brother, think about it. I know what I'm talking about. We're dog people, can't do without our four-legged friends. Benjamin smiled and shook his buddy's hand firmly and left the pet cemetery. Puppy said the word to the man to himself and thought for a moment. A moose pecked at his face. A faint smile. A hand clenched into a fist. Sleep well, my boy, pronounced Anthony, looking at the fresh grave of his dog. Goga motherfucker, you're kidding me, shouted Kelly, 2 months later, not choosing his expression. Another dog. Why? Anthony seemed not to hear his wife, for all his attention was focused on the puppy. A month and a half after Remy's death, Anthony, after careful thought, decided to get another dog. Every day after the funeral, he felt worse and worse. It was as if the once active man was getting older and older. Every day he lost all interest in life. The colors of the world became more and more pleasant and colorless. It seemed to him that he was ready to die. Trying to find the will to live him, and an important decision was made. Puppies to be called Benjamin and arranged for a viewing. Anthony arrived at the kennel of his dog. He saw immediately a very young puppy. It was only 3 weeks old. The unsightly and clumsy puppy had only just opened his eyes and did not know how to do anything at all. According to the kennel's rules, you could only buy a dog when the puppy was at least 3 months old. However, Benjamin knew his mate well. He could be trusted. After another 2 weeks, Anthony Pavlovich was already driving home from his friend, and a new family member was sitting in the back. The puppies had already had all the necessary vaccinations, kennel branding, and even the passport was ready. A little red-haired Irish setter named Mario was now to be Anthony's new best friend. Anthony, damn you. Who the hell am I talking to? The woman continued to be indignant. What the hell is this? Why do you need another dog? The grown and solid man sat up straight on the floor like a small child playing with a puppy. Little Rio wagged his dainty tail merrily and fidgeted in one place as if he were a doll. Anthony laughed, looking the doggy over with a wide people palm. He muttered, "Do you know what his full name is? Who are you talking to?" The lady asked irritably, rubbing her nose. "Do you look like a matman? Rio de Janeiro." Anthony laughed, continuing to rub his furry friend behind the ear. "Anthony, what do you want from me?" "Woman." Finally, he turned his attention to his wife. "You got a problem with that. Nobody's keeping you here." Emotionless, he said. Kelly immediately turned from anger to grace. She spoke affectionately. She held out her hand. "How could I be without you? Why are you sulking?" Anthony roughly turned around from his annoying spouse. He got to his feet, taking the puppy under his arm. "Without me," he interjected. "Yeah, I think you'll be fine without a problem." He was about to leave the living room where he had been playing with the puppy, but Kelly blocked his way, not letting him pass. "What are you talking about?" she asked in a thin, high-pitched voice. "You're the love of my life. I've given you all of me." She looked into his eyes as she usually did when waiting. Of course, the cunning woman was lying, as it was already mentioned. The feeling of love, warmth, care for someone other than herself was unavailable to her. It seemed that she was not a woman at all, but just a biological shell, a pretty shell, even at a very advanced age, devoid of feelings, but good at manipulation. "Anthony, I gave you my whole life. I'm not a boy to fall for your flirtations." He turned on his heels and sat down on the couch, putting the dog beside him. "I don't know why you didn't leave then. But remember, I wouldn't mind if you left right now. But how dare you?" She sighed theatrically, clutching her chest. "Oh, heart, aren't you ashamed of driving me to it? I love you, that man, that betrayal. It was a mistake, stupid and insignificant. I've never loved anyone the way I love you." "Lies," exclaimed the infatuated hunter. "You love no one. How can you not be ashamed?" Continue to play on the feelings of the spouse. "It is after all that I have experienced. I have loved you all my life." She paused meaningfully. "And besides, where would I go? You know I'm all alone in this world. I have only you and no relatives or friends." "But that's nonsense too," Anthony answered her. "Couldn't you have gone to that lover? Don't lecture me." He did. "I guess I should have divorced you then. I took pity on the poor orphan, and I loved you." The man closed his eyes, tilts his head. Little Rio continued to watch his master attentively, waiting to continue their merry game. Anthony, on the other hand, quietly spoke. "Kelly, go mind your own business and leave us alone." "I loved you and I love you now." Kelly snuggled up to her husband, sitting down next to him. "But why do you need that dog? You have me. And God forbid something happens to you, and what happens to that dog? That's what you were thinking about at the time. I'm not going to be with him. I'm not going hunting." "Anthony, well, let's get him back before it's too late." "But what are you missing?" Anthony opened his eyes sharply from the curve. Surprised, he asked, "Do you even know how much that dog is worth? His pedigree, his kennel, his breed, after all. It's all very expensive. And what does that mean? If something happens to you?" "Kelly, I'm only a couple years older than you. I don't care how much it costs. I don't care if there's a mutt sleeping in your bed outside the store. Don't you dare," quietly said the man Boyles. I'm sorry. Kelly smiled charmingly. "Well, why do you need him? Let's get him back." "Kelly, get off," roughly answered the man, notwithstanding the pressure of his wife. "None of your business. I already told you, if you don't like it, you don't belong here. I'll do what I want." He was silent for a while, daring to say the following. "You haven't given me any children. Do you have to love someone?" Kelly, shocked by her husband's words, suddenly jumped up from her seat. "Oh, and that's after all that I've been through." And for a couple of seconds, hurled a stern look at his interlocutor, then ran out of the living room. "Oh shit," the man Kelly cursed. He jumped up and sternly told Rio to wait and followed her leisurely. In the 5th year of their marriage, Anthony began to insist on children. He could not understand why his beloved wife kept refusing. At first, she said that they should live longer in marriage and get to know each other better. But now they had been together for 5 years. Then she said they needed more money to have a child. Anthony ramped up his successful business. Then she said that times are not the same now, and a fortune teller told her that she can't have a baby until she's 35. In general, she refused as much as she could at the moment, when she realized that Anthony would not give up, and if she didn't give birth, he might leave her for someone else. Kelly decided it was time to agree, at least in words. She solemnly announced to her husband that she was ready for children, and the couple began to try to have children. At first, Kelly was sneaky. She took birth control pills in secret from her husband. However, such deception was quickly exposed when once he saw accidentally these pills in her bedside table, as from being made a scoundrel, realized it is necessary to act more radically. Then she finally allowed herself to get pregnant, and drinking the special drug, set up everything so that she had a miscarriage. Of course, Kelly didn't want children. She just didn't want them, she hated them. She realized that she could never love a child, just as she could never love anyone in her whole life. Kelly, sacrificing her own health and the new life that had managed to bud inside her, had faked a miscarriage. To achieve her own goals, she was not spared anything. But what was the result? Allegedly having learned about the miscarriage, Kelly made a real show, wringing her hands, sobbing at the top of her voice, howling, tearing her hair out, never again, screaming her heart out, I'll never do it again. Basically, she did everything she could to make the impressionable Anthony regret cheating and bury the thought of one day becoming a father. She manipulated her spouse as if he were her rag doll. This is how she once again managed to deceive the only man who truly loved her. Kelly, I'm sorry. Out of breath, Anthony said, catching up with his spouse in her bedroom. I'm sorry you miscarried. I wasn't thinking. Of course you didn't. She theatrically put her hand to her forehead. You weren't the one who lost the baby. You dare remind me of the agony, if not the pain. How could you, Kelly? The man moved closer to his wife and hesitantly pulled her into his arms. He couldn't remember the last time he had hugged his wife. Well, I'm sorry to remind you, but it was my baby too. I've been through the same thing you have. Of course you have, she said indignantly, leaning into her husband's shoulder and smiling victoriously when he couldn't see her face. It wasn't you who bore him, not you. Well, I'm sorry, once again the man said. At the same time, Kelly began sobbing loudly, mimicking a cry. Hunter squeezed his spouse a little harder in his embrace. Kelly, on the other hand, smiled predatorily, knowing that he could not see her face. Idiot, she thought to herself, rejoicing at how lucky her husband was to be burning once again. She continued to sob loudly and desperately, until the following happened. Anthony suddenly in his wife's arms, grabbing her by the heart, and he cried out his heart. The paramedic took the couple wide steps back. What? What's the matter with you? Desperately she shouted, pictorially clasping her hands and in the heart of vengeful joy, anticipating the subsequent events. My heart was wheezing. The man having already fallen to his knees and collapsed on his side. To me, the doctor in a quiet, frightening whisper said he heart. Kelly, frightened actually by this terrifying and painful scene, rushed was to the phone, as suddenly stopped abruptly. She looked around, remembering which of the servants were at home today. It was the housekeeper's day off, she said. Quietly, thinking aloud, the cleaning lady won't be in until tomorrow. She suddenly smiled broadly. We're all alone in the house. Kelly. Anthony was already losing consciousness, but was still holding on to life. With a last effort of "Will you ambulance?" as hoarsely he squeezed out. Like hell I did, she replied, smiling wryly. Who can prove that I saw you lose? And I can't wait any longer, I'm sick of you. All I want is your inheritance. She laughed wickedly, and you wrote my will to someone else, didn't you? Yes, and to whom she would have grinned, she added. You have no one else but that dog. Everything will go to me at last. Anthony, realizing that he was dying, gathered the last of his strength and quietly answered deceitfully. So that's what it turns out to be. Your inheritance is ready. Rio. That's when Anthony let go of the spirit and the name of the red puppy. It was still on his lips. Kelly and the new Chalol along the deserted forest road. Upbeat music could be heard from the speakers. A bloodthirsty smile froze on the criminal's face. She was wearing wide sunglasses. A black silk scarf was tied on her head. The woman couldn't believe her happiness. Finally, for so many years I have waited for this moment. For so many years I thought it was a crazy lady. And she was reading to us on the highway practicing a complicated speech. Her husband had finally died. Died in her arms. And in fact, she's the one who finished him off. She's the one who didn't call an ambulance. She gave him a heart attack with her tears and tantrums about the child she killed. The cause of death turned out to be just such a massive heart attack. Of course, if help had been rendered in time, Anthony could have been saved. But that was not part of Laura's devious plans. And now that Anthony's funeral was settled, it was time to do what Kelly had dreamed of all the years of their marriage. It was time to deal with the inheritance. She drove to the notary, rehearsing how she would sob uncontrollably, playing on the pity of those around her. She was already approaching the appointed place when she suddenly remembered that she wasn't entirely alone in the car. "Right," she exclaimed. She braked sharply. There was a sharp squeal of brakes, and Kelly swerved off the highway, stopping on the side of the road at the fork in the road. She turned around to the back seat. "You hissed," she hissed, pointing a finger with a long purple nail at the small, puzzled huff of this puppy. The doggy tilted his head to the side, of course not understanding what was going on after his owner disappeared to an unknown destination. He decided that this woman was now his main mistress. He bobbed his thin tail happily, not expecting anything bad to happen. Kelly did not stop, as if she wanted to unleash on the unconditional creature all the emotions that she could not express before Anthony. "You shit all over my house." She was cursing at the poor dog. "You nasty, stinking dog. I'm not going to let you ruin my happy new life." With those words, she leisurely got out of the car, opened the back door, and held out the puppy's long, cold, manicured hand. Baby Rio, with no backward thought, smiled at his mistress. He was excited, figuring they would go for a walk now. They had been on car rides like this before with the old master. True, he spoke better, calm and affectionate, but he too would put him in the back and open the door to let him out into the woods. Oh, if this little guy only knew what was waiting for him now. Cruel Kelly, without a drop of regret, grabbed the puppy by the scruff of the neck and threw it with a swing into the grass near the secondary road. Then, shaking her hands squeamishly, she sat back in the car, and before the doggy could realize anything, she stung the gas pedal with all her might. The 2-month-old puppy was left all alone. At first he thought it was such a fun game and quickly, and Fuck rushed after the departing cars, but it was all for nothing. He was exhausted and yapping pitifully. He wandered quietly along the highway, abandoned and unwanted. Kelly at the same time turned on the loud music in the cabin and cheered. At last she had managed to get rid of all those who were in her way so much. Oh, what happiness! She was already approaching her destination, not yet knowing that her grand plan was unlikely to come true. Many things. A lot of things didn't come out as easily as they seemed at first glance. But the boy raised his blonde eyebrows in surprise. "Mom, look what's so cute," asked the boy's mom, without taking her eyes off the road. "You know, you can meet deer here. The forest is just around the corner. Look carefully, Thomas. No, look, I think there's a dog." The boy kept pointing out the window. "Mom, he's all alone." "Why is that?" "Let's stop." The woman behind the wheel slowed down, pulling over to the side of the road. Squinted. She followed her son's directions with her gaze. "Wow, how small," she said with surprise. "Is he lost?" The boy asked in surprise. "We have to help him." "I don't know," replied the boy's mother. "I guess he really is lost." She pulled away from the curb and cautiously drove closer to where the trembling red puppy was sitting. God, he was so tiny and so cute. He must have a collar. With those words, the woman got out of the car. Her son Thomas, 10, jumped out after his mother. He skipped briskly toward the puppy, but when he saw that the little one was frightened and brought to the ground, he stopped. "He's scared," whispered the boy. "Of course he's scared. Don't scare the little one." The young mother began to walk slowly toward the puppy, holding out her hand to him. "Don't be afraid, little one. We want to help you," she said affectionately. Little Rio looked puzzled and incredulous at these strangers. At first he wanted to run away, but then, realizing something for himself, he made a careful and slow step towards these unknown people. A thin tail, clamped between his trembling hind legs, stuck out and weakly returned. On this very roadside the little fellow had already spent several hours. For the first time he didn't understand at all what was going on. He tried to catch up with every passing car, to see if his mistress had returned, but it was all in vain. He seemed to be all alone in the world, abandoned first by his master and then by his mistress. Frozen and hungry, he was too young to take care of himself. He took another step. He was not to be abused, then another and another. And now he was already cautiously securing the hand that was held out to him. It smelled very nice, much better than the old mistress's, or even smelled like a horrible, strong, synthetic scent. This soft hand smelled like something herbal and still tasty. I guess she's not his enemy. Well done. The woman praised the dog, smiling. Now let me see your collar. She gently took the baby under her breast, lifting him into her arms. He cried out softly, but when he realized he was in no danger, he accepted the fact that he was being probed. The young woman twirled the collar in her hands. Nothing, just a regular collar, but a rather expensive leather one. There was a little hard capsule in the middle with all the phone numbers. No address to take the puppy to. She carefully removed the collar, in case there was some information on the other side. But alas, it was still the same, nothing but a small engraving. The woman raised her eyebrows. Rio de Janeiro, she read, the only thing written on the collar. What does that mean? She asked her son. Is he a Brazilian? The boy couldn't stand by any longer, took a wide step towards the child. He slowly held out his hand to the baby for a sniff, as Rio acknowledged the stranger and realized that this one was no threat to him either. And what's more, that he was a human puppy too, cheerfully assured with his tail. Little Thomas was absolutely thrilled. He began, 3-5 Fluffy behind his long ears, gently stroking his smooth head. Ain't mama, what Brazilian? That's his name. Rio de Janeiro. Rio. And Rio's short for Rio, he's definitely called Rio. Look, he's responding. You're probably right, Thomas's mom said thoughtfully. But what are we going to do? He's freezing. His owners are probably already looking for him. With longing in his voice, said the boy. How did he get so lost? The woman raised her head, and she was silent for a few seconds, and then answered her son Thomas, I think he is not lost. What then? Asked Thomas, continuing to stroke the dog, who was already cozy in the arms of the woman. How did he end up here? I think he was abandoned. With bitterness in her voice, she replied. Abandoned. The boy asked indignantly, how could that be? Who could do such a thing? He's just a little boy, such a beautiful red-haired mommy. We'll take him for ourselves. For ourselves. Surprised asked the woman Honey, but we have no room for a dog. Besides, I don't know what breed it is. Suddenly he's washing into a huge dog, and we don't have much money. The boy tilted his head dreamily to the side. Yes, he stretched out as if not hearing his mother's arguments. He will definitely grow up and be big, big will protect us. Mommy, but we can't leave him here. He's gonna be alone. Oh, you're right, honey, the woman replied quietly. Of course we'll take him with us. Doria was a young single mother. She had separated from her father Thomas before she could even marry him. He left her when she was 7 months pregnant. Doria was a very kind woman, intelligent, beautiful, and incredibly capable. After graduating from school with a gold medal, becoming a real pride of her family, she entered one of the best universities in the country, dreaming of becoming a veterinarian. Her parents were proud of her. School teachers prophesied a bright future, and even friends marveled at how one person could combine both beauty and an incredible sharp mind. All in all, Doria grew up first as a wonderful child, and then as a hopeful teenager. And finally, she grew up. A beautiful and intelligent woman. Many around her were convinced that this person was capable of much. The first year at the institute went smoothly. Doria found it easy to study. Relations with classmates were just great, and she even had time for fun. So inherent in youth and personal life, this very life was beating key. One day, he appeared in her life. This was the name of the man who spoiled the whole life of a young, excellent, and beautiful girl. The guys met in the hall of the university, where the young man came to pick up his documents after expulsion. Word for word, smiles, light flirtation. And now Doria is already curling her long, light blonde hair. Preparing for the next assignment, her friends, having found out with whom she was going to meet, twisted their fingers at her temples. He's a jerk, the students lamented. You'll never work out. He's not right for you. They discouraged her. But Doria didn't care about public opinion. Something about David. There was something in him that Doria herself lacked. Freedom from conventional frameworks, boldness, and absolute rejection of the structure of the world. That's what attracted her. Good girls, unfortunately, are always drawn to the bad guys. David was expelled from the second year of study for failure, but he didn't seem to care at all. High school doesn't mean anything, he assured his new girlfriend on their first date. "I am without education much to achieve," he said. The young people started dating. Their relationship developed rapidly, and here on New Year's vacation, Daria was on her way with her beloved to her hometown to introduce him to her family. The parents of the girl were in complete shock. Mitri turned out not at all who they would like to see next to their daughter. His long hair was gathered in a neat bundle, all his hands in strange tattoos, and between the eyebrows there was a piercing. David's mom, when she saw her daughter's boyfriend, grabbed her heart. Her father didn't bother and just threw them out after he made some unpleasant remarks about their modest home environment. Daria sobbed, unable to remember herself from grief. For what? What had he done to you? Angrily, she asked her parents. He's not at all what he seems at first sight. But her mother and father held their position, strictly forbade her to meet this young man, which awakened in Daria a real rebellion. "If you do not accept my David, then you are no longer my parents." She shouted in her heart the girl's father, having decided that soon she would realize who she had messed with. Glumly replied, "Well, that means that you are no longer our daughter." Daria lost her parents overnight. She cut off all contact with them, preferring her lover to her family. The girl returned to the hostel with mixed feelings. Resentment choked her, but it was too late to retreat. She stopped communicating with those friends who were against her David. David himself forbade her to communicate with some of them, and many of them cut off all contact with Daria. When Daria found out who she was dating, sometimes it seemed to Daria that the whole world was against them. Against her, against David, against their relationship. She didn't know how to go on, but she knew one thing for sure: no one could ever separate them. Another 6 months went by like that. And here Daria, having quarreled with absolutely everyone, decided to move out of the dormitory and start a life together with David. The student moved to live in the apartment of her beloved A. He lived quite differently than he had described to her earlier spacious apartment of his own. In the center of the city turned out to be a modest one-room on the outskirts, and instead of the promised housekeeper together, with David lived his grandmother, an old woman, about 90 years old. Daria, suffering from dementia, was in complete shock when she saw the conditions that life had prepared for her. Wouldn't the hostel be better? She asked herself, but it was too late to back out. It was not for nothing that she had completely abandoned her surroundings for David. Dina moved to her beloved, hoping for the best. After all, he promised to achieve incredible success. "We'll get through this," she thought, "but we're together. And let the whole world see what our love can do." After moving into her boyfriend's apartment, the student began to clean it up. She removed dusty 100-year-old wall carpets, washed the curtains, threw out all the junk that Wendy had collected over the years. Grandmother David increasingly Daria skipped classes more and more. Often Daria preferred domestic chores to studying. Daria got so into the role of a housewife that she even got used to the fact that Wendy's grandmother lived with them. She was quite a sweet old lady, at least as long as she didn't scare with her sleepwalking at night and strange behaviors. She'd leave the gas on, open the window wide open in the cold. The life of a young, promising girl slowly began to fade. She had already completely abandoned her studies. Her mood was more and more often floating at zero. She seemed bored with everything. David didn't seem so rebellious and rather an infantile singer. And even Wendy turned out to be an unusual grandmother, but a crazy old woman. Everything that Daria had fantasized about David turned out to be false. It turned out that he was expelled from the institute, not because he was carried away by a promising job on the side, but because he was simply lazy. And even the money on which the guy took his beloved to cafes and movies was not his income. It was his grandmother's pension. More and more often David did not appear at home. More and more often young Daria spent her evenings in the company of Wendy, cleaning up the mess the mad woman was making. Of course, kind Daria did the best she could and felt sorry for Wendy and tried to make her well. Inviting doctors home, and even washing the old lady in the bathtub and brushing her tangled hair. That day, when Daria, who had already lost patience and was tired of this life, was about to leave, a photograph caught her eye. It was a very old photograph. It had fallen out of the closet when Daria was packing her things. Daria looked at the photo and marveled. There was a picture of herself in the photograph. Yes, that's right. Wendy, only a very young, beautiful, laughing woman. She was holding some kind of miraculous apparatus and was wearing a white robe. And from the inscription on the back of the photo, Daria was surprised to realize that the old woman, suffering from dementia atheism, had once been a leading researcher with a PhD. Digging through the box from which the picture had fallen out, Daria learned a lot about Grandma Wendy's past. She had once been a prominent member of society, beautiful, intelligent, and self-reliant. The girl's heart clenched with pain and resentment for the old lady. Did she deserve such a life? That day, Daria never made up her mind to move out from David. She waited for the young man and had a serious conversation with him. Daria insisted on treating Wendy's grandmother. After all, she'd once been a well-respected woman. Did she deserve to have her own grandson take her pension? She deserved all of this. Why was the only person who had anything to do with her now was a girl who was a stranger to her? A girl whose name she couldn't remember and whom Wendy used to scare. Every time she went into the kitchen and thought she was a thief, Daria insisted that David should go to work, and on Wendy's good pension to look for a boarding house worthy of her, where the elderly are kept in cleanliness and comfort. But the indifferent David only lazily waved it away. Daria insisted, and then he got really angry. "Aha, you're so clever," he shouted angrily. "For her looks. How am I supposed to live then? Her doctor's pension is my main income. Do you know how she behaved when I was a kid? No, then mind your own business. She ain't going to no goddamn boarding school. Let her stay at home, she ain't got much time left anyway. To smoke the sky." Daria was in complete shock at what she had heard, because David's parents had died when he was a teenager. Wendy had no other relatives. Daria had grudgingly stayed in the apartment for the sake of Wendy's grandmother. Now she has completely abandoned her studies. She takes care of the infirm old woman. And after another 6 months, Daria unplanned got pregnant. Seeing 2 stripes on the test, she froze in place and did not feel anything at all. On the one hand, she had always thought that children were happiness. On the other hand, Daria wasn't at all sure what David would make of her. A good father. The unfortunate woman was floundering, not knowing where to put herself. Defense, of course, was out of the question. But what should she do? The confused student decided to call her parents first. The girl's father, having learned that his daughter is expecting a child, from this David came to full fury. "Don't you dare have a baby with that asshole," he yelled into the phone. "You'll give birth to an imbecile like him. And then you'll forget about us forever." That day, Daria realized that there was nowhere to wait for help. She waited for David and told him the latest news. But he only lazily waved away his chosen one, and then ate the dinner she had prepared. He smirked cool on an exhalation, he reported. "What does that mean? Are you entitled to any benefits now?" Yes. With her head, the girl realized that there was no hope for change in her young man at all. The young heart continued to believe it. Will he change when the baby is born? With a huff, she thought, a baby will make him a better man. Meanwhile, David found out that a single mother's allowance would be more than a married mother's, and plans for a wedding had to be canceled. Under the judgmental and curious stares of former fellow students, Daria hurried to the dean's office. She had come to do something that no one expected her to do: to take her documents from the university without graduating. Growing up, sticking her neck out, she came to dispel the myth that good girls never get into trouble. Former classmates at first did not even recognize in the stranger her Daria, taking her for someone's mother the surrounding murmurs. The most insolent ones were laughing and pointing their fingers, and David's name was repeatedly heard. She ignored the gossip. With a proud head, she took her documents and left the institute for good. Now a new life awaited her, an adult, family life. But since there was very little money in the newfound family, yesterday's students had to go out to work. Unfinished higher education did not give any advantages, and without experience they didn't take them anywhere. So poor Daria had to go wherever there was any money to be made. A dishwasher in a cafe. She invested the money she earned in the needs of her future child, buying all the things necessary for him, and saved the rest for a decent old age for Wendy. David, for his part, was not investing in any way. He almost stopped showing up at home. And at some point, Daria was horrified to discover that the money she had set aside had begun to disappear. When she called her future spouse for a serious talk, she learned a terrible thing. David suffered from mania, and almost all of Daria's earnings went to gambling. The heart of the future mother was shattered. She didn't know how to go on living. Her parents abandoned her. She had no friends left, and the man for whom the promising student gave up her future betrayed her. Or rather, not even so simply turned out to be completely different from the one whose image she drew in her amorous imagination. That's all, banal and bitter. Daria would like to leave him now, but her caring heart clenched with pain for Wendy. How could she be without her, 7 months pregnant? It was all decided by chance. One winter's evening, David didn't come home alone. Next to him was a young and pretty girl who embarrassingly hid her eyes. David proudly announced that he was in love and, in a rude way, asked Daria to move out the same day, so Daria had to leave the place she used to consider her home. Abandoned by everyone, a lonely loner. She just didn't know where to go if it wasn't for the baby. What was the young mother carrying under her heart? Daria would probably have given up, but for the sake of her baby, she gritted her teeth and fought on. A couple weeks later, dude, at the not-so-educated ex-girlfriend's house. Luck smiled on her, and Daria met a married couple who were on the lookout for a live-in housekeeper. She had found them through the classified ads. These kind people took the pregnant girl in, giving her a job and shelter. Daria worked in the sweat of her brow, with no memory of rest. The life she created for herself now, after 10 years of almost continuous labor, was achieved through pain and tears. And then she gave birth to a healthy baby boy and named him Thomas. And all these years she raised and educated him alone. She managed to get out of the hole into which the once young, desperately in love student had fallen. Of course, David's situation is not brilliant now, but she can still afford to rent a decent apartment and have a car to support herself and Thomas. What's life like? Far from ideal, of course. But Daria is happy to have what she has. She never made peace with her parents. The resentment against them was too strong. And what was expected? So nothing is unknown. He didn't even answer the incoming call when the young mother called him from the maternity hospital. Daria was deprived of the future that everyone around her had so long and persistently prophesied to her. She had chosen her child over her own blood. Maybe someone will find her actions silly, or maybe someone will recognize in them themselves or their loved ones, and at least mentally support this young, selfless mother. In any case, David's life was the result of her actions. She never got a higher education and a prestigious job, but now she had more than money. David had a healthy and well-behaved son. She worked in a veterinary clinic, just as she had once dreamed. Of course, she didn't manage to become a doctor, but the vacancy of an administrator was quite accessible to her. And now in their lives there was a puppy, a small, and without a nice creature, which also needs support and protection. Maybe Daria will still find her happiness. Anything can happen. Who knows? The door to the apartment swung open and a happy Thomas ran inside, waving his arms happily. "We have a dog. Yay, dog," he shouted with joy. "Mom, where is he gonna sleep? Can he sleep with me?" "Oh, please," the boy made a funny grimace. "Oh, Thomas, but don't get ahead of yourself," stopped the uncontrollable joy of the child's mother. "He still needs to get used to us, We'll find a corner for him now." With these words, Daria slowly lowered the puppy she had been holding in her arms to the floor. Little Rio froze fearfully in place in front of him. He looked around uncertainly and trotted forward by his tail. "Oh, he's so fast," Thomas said excitedly. "Mom, how old do you think he is?" Daria frowned. "Oh, I don't know. Honey, this is the first time I've seen this breed of dog. I think he's still very young. No more than 2 months, 2.5. How much work do we have to do with him?" That's how little Rio settled in with David and Thomas and became a full member of the family. He seemed to grow by leaps and bounds. Growing bigger and smarter every day, Daria was not wrong in saying that the family still had a lot to look forward to. Rio turned out to be a real tomboy. He ran around the apartment like a bullet, demolishing everything in his path. Outside on a walk, Rio kept all the pigeons in the neighborhood busy when he saw birds. His funny face changed immediately, becoming more serious and attentive. In addition, Daria learned to toilet train the baby. In general, the family's life became much more complicated, but much brighter and fuller. One day, Daria found out that the collar they found Rio with was too small for him. She started looking for a new accessory on the internet, all the while mindlessly twirling the small collar in her hands. Maybe she should give it to someone. Daria was about to place an order from the store for another road behavior, a bag of food. I couldn't resist adding a toy for Rio. Suddenly, something caught her eye. That capsule she'd noticed the first time she'd met Rio. It seemed she wasn't so simple. Daria spun it around in her hands, frowning slightly. "Thomas," she called to her son from the other room. "Thomas, come here." The boy was immediately at his mother's side. In his hands dangled a puppy, obviously quite tall. After their recent walk together, his eyes were closing and his paws hung limply, letting the world know how tired he was. Thomas held the baby carefully with both hands and glanced unhappily at his mother. "What's the matter? Can't you see I'm busy?" Daria laughed warmly. "That's interesting," she clarified. "How what?" the boy asked indignantly. "I was putting Rio to bed." "Honey, he's not a baby." Laughing, she replied. "He doesn't need to be put to bed. He's doing just fine on his own." "He should be," Thomas said resentfully. "Why did you call me?" "Right." Daria took the capsule off the collar and slipped it into her son's hands. "Look at this thing," she said thoughtfully. "Don't you think it's strange?" Thomas laid the puppy down on a nearby couch and took the capsule in his hand with a smart look. He twirled it around for a long time until there was a strange sound, and the capsule opened in two. The boy looked fearfully at his mother, and I didn't want to break it. "It's okay. Honey," the mother smiled. She bent down to put the capsule back together as she suddenly noticed a small rolled-up piece of paper on the floor. That's what she held out. "What's that?" "What? What is it?" asked Thomas. "Mom." He suddenly grabbed his mother's hand before she could open the paper. "Mom, wait. What is it?" Daria asked. The boy looked longingly at his mom in a quiet voice. He began. "What if this piece of paper has an address to the address of Rio's former owners? It's not like we're going to get it back. They do now." Daria hesitated for a moment. In fact, she hadn't even had time to think about what could be stored in this capsule. What if the address of the former owners had indeed been found? Goosebumps ran down her spine. It turns out it should have been returned to its owners long ago. But Thomas, the boy, is so attached to the baby, and in general. What kind of owners would leave a puppy by the highway? Daria shook her head decisively. "No, Thomas, that dog is ours now and no one else's." She replied confidently. If the former owners cared about the puppy, they wouldn't have left him out on the street to freeze. "Yes," Thomas answered cheerfully. "You're right, Mommy." "What's the matter with that piece of paper?" he asked impatiently. Daria finally unfolded the paper too. She was ready for different options. But what she saw inside only added more questions. 591490. She read the note. "And that's it?" she asked upwards and shrugged, perplexed. "What kind of a set of numbers is that? It doesn't look like a phone number." "Thomas, what do you think?" The boy rubbed his chin thoughtfully. "Maybe it's his personal number or something." "What do you mean?" she asked. "What other number?" "I don't know what number. Just a number that's his personal number. Like that branding he has on his tummy." "You think so?" Daria said thoughtfully. "I guess you're right." "I'm sure," the boy answered proudly. There came a savory sneer from him with a downpour. Thomas and his mom instantly turned around to the source of the sound and found an already awake Rio. Happy, joyous, but still sweetly howling. Oh man, Thomas was indignant. "We woke him up and now we have to put him back to sleep." He took a couple of steps toward the puppy, but the little one jumped up playfully, falling onto his front legs and leaping off the couch, barking cheerfully. A few seconds later, the two fun-loving boys and the puppy were already rattling the apartment, chasing each other and knocking over everything in their path. Rio was running around the apartment like he didn't know what was wrong at all. It's fatigue. He swung himself up under the couch, jumped inside a basket of dirty laundry, pissed off, pretending to growl at Thomas and clinging with his sharp lips to his clothes. All in all, the couple was having as much fun as they could. Daria laughed merrily, looking at them, and was unable to even pretend to swear. Finally, she placed the order from the store, stood up from her computer desk, and stretched. To hell with that number, she thought to herself, but for some reason she didn't decide to throw away the hidden capsule, along with that strange piece of paper. Instead, Daria put the capsule back together, putting the number inside, and headed for the large closet to put the find away. Daria searched with her eyes for a long time for a place to hide the strange item. She once again had time to think, why not just throw it away? But some unknown force stopped her again. Daria reached for the top shelf of the closet with her hand, found the box where her jewelry was kept, put the capsule and the note inside, and put the box back upstairs. After a couple of minutes, she forgot about the strange find. At the same time, on the other side of the city in the notary's office, there was an unusual and even a little frightening dialogue. "What the fuck is the number?" shouted the spittle-spattered Kelly. "Can you explain what it is?" "Kelly? I don't know myself." Calm, placating. The tone was answered by a personable young fellow, an assistant notary. "I'm just telling you what the document says." The angry lady, irritated and tiredly, ran her palm across her face. "I need more information." Through gritted teeth, she sneered. "I'm explaining to you. I don't have that information." Slowly boiling over, replied the employee. "Just accept the fact that based on the last will of the deceased, inheritance was not intended for you." Kelly's face turned purple, her hands shook, her eyebrows drew together over the transfer and day. "How dare you?" she began in a quiet tone. "Who are you, anyway, to talk about my deceased husband? Actually, I am his lawful wife. Respect it." The guy sighed patiently and, improving the moment while she wasn't looking at him, rolled his eyes. To receive the inheritance of Citizen Volushin, or rather the overwhelming part of the inheritance mass, namely money, the heir must provide a certain numerical code number. If you want, either remember this number or look for it somehow in the things of her husband, or either that the widow angrily splashed her hands and kicked me out of here. You have no right. Kelly was silent for a moment, and then there was a noticeable change in her face and lips. She smiled benevolently, which seemed especially creepy in contrast to her previous mood. Did her eyes sparkle with a greedy gleam? She changed her face instantly. Anger was replaced by coquetry. Even the widow's voice changed when she asked, "So you know the number?" "What?" The employee was outraged, involuntarily making a repulsive gesture. No, of course not. He wanted to leave the meeting room where he was having the conversation. With this tired of left customers, but stopped to say yes, even if I knew, I would not tell you at least, because I have no right to do so. And at most, because what rights are you talking about? Suddenly, his assistant was interrupted by his voice. A mediocre boss. In the spacious office appeared the one with whom Kelly had spent the most time in recent months. The notary himself, the notary to whom the late Anthony always referred, a solid man, smiled broadly at his client and looked at his assistant with disapproval. "What are those tones?" "Benjamin," gently but menacingly he asked, "you can't talk to a lady like that." Yes, of course, the boy sneered and did not continue the dialogue. Under the stern gaze of his boss, he left the meeting room embarrassed, throwing one last disgruntled look at the nasty client. The notary guiltily smiled. "Forgive my assistant. He is still too young. Let's please go to my office." Kelly is getting annoyed. Fidgeting harder and harder, she nodded her shoulder. "We come on," she replied confidently and walked forward. When the office door closed, she, deciding not to be ceremonious, got straight to the point. "What is this number?" she asked angrily. "Can anyone explain it to me clearly? I can't get my inheritance for a month. I'm going to sue your office. Mark my words." The lawyer smiled broadly, holding back a laugh. "Go ahead, Kelly. Don't be shy. But on what grounds are you going to sue us?" "Tell me, please, on what basis?" she asked irritably. "On the grounds that you're withholding my inheritance? That's a crime. Everyone knows that my husband was a rich man. You think I don't know how much money we're talking about? Of course, you decided to keep my inheritance for yourself. Cheaters." The notary shook his head. "I knew your husband well. He was not only rich, but also incredibly honorable. That's one thing. Secondly, the certificate of inheritance is issued after 6 months from the date of death. As much as I'd like to, I can't give you access to the inheritance, as you put it, until that time has passed. You've applied for an inheritance. Now, by law, we must wait for all other interested parties, if any, to do the same. And finally, who gave you reason to believe that your late husband's estate should go to you?" In a split second, the restless woman was next to the notary's desk and cracked her fist on it with a rumble. "And who the hell do you all think you are?" she shouted. "What the hell, and to whom? If not me, I'm his lawfully wedded wife. To whoever gives you the secret number as stated in Anthony's will." The notary answered calmly, "I've told you so many times. Don't you remember? You, of course, are also due a marital share of the property acquired during the marriage and available at the time of the death of the testator. Once the statutory period passes, then we'll see what and how to distribute." Kelly seemed to almost explode, literally. "What kind of nonsense is this?" she asked, looking up, wondering when he'd even gotten around to making that weird will. "He had a heart attack. Suddenly he couldn't know he was going to die." "How is that possible?" "Everything is possible," the notary answered firmly. "In general, wills and make mostly in advance, prudent. And people, of course. And your husband, undoubtedly, was such. But let's return to the subject of our little discussion. You found out the number." Did Kelly throw up her hands? "No, I did not." "But you said there was something else. Wasn't there? In addition to the number, you have to provide some proof." "What kind of proof?" "Oh my God," she rolled her eyes. "Remind me, please." "You must prove that you took care of the Brazilian." The notary smiled slyly. "That's all I have to say to a person claiming an inheritance. You must give the right number and provide the very same Brazilian, whoever he is and whatever that means. Only then will you have access to the safety deposit box that holds the bulk of the deceased's estate. Until then, you are quite welcome to use what your late husband left to you personally, namely the apartment he left to you, and the house in the Star. Kelly. In fact, the house does not belong to you now either," the notary replied. "But as long as the other heirs have not claimed it, you can stay in it for a while." The woman laughed nervously. Look, was he even in his right mind? When he made that damn will, I think he was out of his mind then. Putting his dogs to bed with him, giving them funerals. That's what he did for the last few years of his life. She glared and turned around with angry eyes to leave. "Have a nice stay." The lawyer, after waiting until the lady was in the doorway, said quietly to himself under his breath, "You know, Kelly, I have a feeling that Anthony's death has something to do with you. I don't know how, but I'll try to find out." From that day on, the notary and part-time good friend of the deceased Anthony began his investigation. Who knows where it will lead him? The angry widow was on the verge of a nervous breakdown. So many years and all for nothing. Desperate, she thought. It turned out that Anthony did suspect something. He'd written such a convoluted will. Her emotions were running high. Her heart was racing. I wanted to go out and strangle someone with my own hands. Preferably that nasty red dog she'd unfortunately dumped by the roadside. Who knew it could come in handy? Rio? No Rio. Gasping, Daria shouted, coming down in pursuit of her four-legged friend Rio. Stock girlfriend and the young handsome dog only turned around at the call of his mistress. But nature's call was many times stronger. Standing still. For a few seconds, Rio decided that a passing bird is more important than David's call, and throwing a guilty look at his mistress started running. Stop, stop. The young mother was already visibly tired and unable to run anymore. She stopped on the spot, resting her palms on her knees to catch her breath. What kind of dog are you so annoyed with? She exhaled. The older Rio got, the harder he became to handle. At home, the dog behaved much more calmly than he had as a puppy. But outdoors, every time he saw a big bird, he was out of control. Otherwise, everything was fine. Little Rio grew into an adult, very handsome and intelligent dog. Perhaps the problem was his special intelligence. He understood too well everything that was going on around him. That's why he sometimes allowed himself such pranks, like today. Having analyzed the situation, he decided that catching up with the bird was more important than obeying his mistress. This peculiarity of the dog added a lot of problems to Daria. Rio was so fast that it was impossible to catch up with him. But now Daria knew that this behavior was just a peculiarity of her dog's breed. She found out at the clinic where she worked. They were talking about the employees' pets, and Daria decided to check with the doctor about something concerning Rio. Martin, I was wondering. You see, Thomas and I just recently got a dog, but something just struck me as odd. I thought maybe you might know something about it. I'm listening interested, the doctor replied, and stepped forward onto the counter. Congratulations, by the way, a new member of the family. That's great. What breed is it? May I ask? If I knew, I would love to tell you, she guiltily smiled. We found him on the road. Can you believe someone left a baby all alone on the highway? He was so small. He didn't look more than a month old. I don't know what kind of breed he was. But from a baby, our Rio was already a big dog. She proudly squared her shoulders. Yes, it is an interesting dog, though not obedient Rio. The man laughed good-naturedly. Interesting name. Did you come up with it for him? I don't know about that. We didn't come up with the name. The puppy had a collar with Rio de Janeiro engraved on the other side. We decided to call him Rio. And on that collar, there was some kind of capsule. I didn't pay much attention to it at first. I don't know what kind of gadgets they come up with. But when my son and I took a closer look at this capsule, we found a note inside it, and in the note some number. I don't know what to think. It seems nothing unusual, but I can't get these numbers out of my head. The doctor thought for a moment. He looked away. He nodded, nodding his fingers at Daria. I'm not likely to be of much use to you here, he answered honestly. Maybe the phone number of the owners? Oh no, it's definitely not a phone number. There are too few digits. Thomas suggested that perhaps it was his personal number, but an identifier, especially since he was branded on his stomach. Well, Valerie stretched out. I don't think so. To identify this or that animal, he is implanted with a chip. You know yourself. And the number on a piece of paper? Maybe someone is doing it, but in my practice, it has never happened. I see, answered Daria. It's a pity you don't know. I guess I've been giving these numbers so much importance for nothing. I suppose so. What's his branding? Daria shrugged her shoulders. Now she was stinging her hand along the inside of the counter, trying to find her smartphone. Yep, here it is now, showing a picture of the branding. She rummaged through the pictures for a long time, trying to find a picture of the branding that flaunted on Rio's belly button. She was sure she'd taken a picture of it, but it seemed she'd been mistaken. Thomas Picks, Rio blurry pictures, meter readings, and there was still no branding. No sign of it. Daria shook her head. I can't find it. Just show me a picture of the dog. I'll tell you the breed. Right. Daria returned to her phone and proudly turned the screen to the doctor. Martin looked at the picture for a long time. He glanced uncertainly at Daria's receptionist. Are you sure this dog was abandoned? The woman smiled sadly. But of course, at least it looked that way. Why, it's an Irish setter. Raised his eyebrows, Doctor, the hunting breed. If it has a pedigree, which it probably does, judging by the branding, it's a very expensive dog, dear. Anna frowned. But who would leave an expensive puppy on the highway? It would be better to sell it. And why did they buy it at all? It's ridiculous. She brushed it off, and I'll tell you who would. A doctor leaning on the counter. Someone with a lot of money. I don't know what kind of idiots they are. But apparently there are some Irish authors who are very intelligent and very active in nature. Such a breed should be practiced ideally. Go hunting. But you're hardly a hunter. Huntress. Right? Oh, what a hunt. Daria laughed. I don't know anything about it at all. She hesitated. Said or so, no. I assumed he was a thoroughbred. But what's so expensive? What kind? The doctor nodded confidently. You know, what if you could show me the branding sometime? We could find the kennel, and then we could find the owners. Maybe he wasn't dumped at all. Maybe he was just lost. But no, the owner said firmly. I love our Rio, and my Thomas loves him to bits. Suppose we find the owners. And then what? I won't give him away. Do you know? Martin smiled. It's an interesting situation. Good afternoon. Sorry I'm late. A girl appeared in the doorway of the veterinary clinic. Guilty, looking at the doctor. In her hands was a small carryall, and sticking out of the small window was the face of a Yorkshire Terrier. Can you still see us? Sure. The vet nodded and gestured toward his office. Come with me, please. Daria smiled involuntarily at the sight of the doggie in her socks. She suddenly remembered that her son was waiting for her at home and very dirty. After a long walk the dog that Thomas would hardly be able to wash well by himself, Daria thought for a moment. As Valera said, did she ask herself or her sisters? Daria, the breed of dog. Her thoughts continued to revolve around the information she had just received. But really, what difference does it make how much a pet costs if it's part of your family? It could be an expensive and pedigreed dog or just a mongrel. Now Daria. It was even scary to imagine that she could give up their four-legged friend in favor of money. Daria called her son once more, asking how they were doing with the attempt, and looked at the calendar on the city streets. It was going to be a real spring. The snow was almost all melted. The air smelled of both earth and fragrance, and the awakening life-hunting dogs needed more movement. She thought and decided it was time to open the dacha season. David had no apartment of her own, but there was an old shabby house outside the city. She had bought it from a colleague, back when Thomas was a baby. The young mother decided that the child definitely needs fresh air, and she, in turn, her own real estate, taking a loan, which, by the way, she still has not fully paid off. She became a homeowner in the winter on this daughter was impossible to be on this house. No heating. But in the summer, it was so beautiful. And in the spring, of course, it was nice too. Having decided that it was high time to start going to the country house, Daria immediately informed Thomas about the upcoming trip, and with joy in her heart started to wait for the weekend. By Friday evening, the whole family, including the dog, arrived at the cottage. Daria got out of the car first to open the gate. Thomas, along with Rio, remained seated inside for the time being. The woman got out of the car, looking around. She took a deep breath of the fresh, already slightly warm and air. It's beautiful, Daria said aloud. She opened the old gate to park the car inside the lot, got back behind the wheel. When the car pulled inside and the gate was closed again, the mother nodded her head to her son as a sign that they could get out of the car. Just be careful with hers, she warned. Yep, replied the boy and opened the door wide at the same second. As if at the speed of light, an excited dog jumped out of the car. For a couple of minutes, he secured the territory, and then, contrary to the expectations of his mistress, sagged, and Plasteski lightning fast passed and bent under the closed wickets. Rio, stop. He ran after the dog, shouted the frustrated Daria, stop, to whom I say stop. But the infatuated dog did not even turn around at the call of his mistress. He with amazing grace maneuvered among the bare bushes and put piles of snow, deftly jumping over large puddles, tired from running. Daria stopped and looked angrily after Rio's pets, as if guided by an invisible thread, definitely running towards his goal. But Daria had no way of knowing what that goal was. She panted and chased after the tireless hunter again. After all, he had almost disappeared from her sight. Eventually, the restless Rio led her to a wide field. There he, in spite of the fact that almost up to his chest, fell into the snowdrifts. With incredible speed, he flew into the bushes and picked up a large flock of large birds unknown to Daria. The birds noisily beat their wings and flew into the air at once. Rio finally stopped, mesmerized, watching the game. Also watching the birds, mesmerized, was Daria herself, as beautifully as it came out of her mouth. She shifted her gaze to the psoriasis and get over here already. The dog looked at his mistress with an expectant gaze. He seemed to be waiting for something. He tilted his head to the side. There was disappointment in his gaze. It was as if he was telling her, well, what about you? Daria took a step toward Rio's dog. It's time to go home. The dog only barked unhappily in response. Daria, however, continued to slowly approach the dog to grab the prankster by the collar and lead him home. Why are you so eager to catch those birds? She asked him. Of course he does. Suddenly a rough male voice came from behind her. Daria flinched, turned around, and saw a tall, broad-shouldered man approaching her, a large gun dangling from his shoulder. He was wearing a camouflage suit and thigh-high boots. The stranger smiled broadly as he approached. You don't have an ordinary dog, but a real hunter, he said. You don't have to feed a dog like that. Just let him pick up the game. And from the looks of it, you have a fine specimen. I envy you, he said, coming almost right up to the woman. I know, she said, embarrassed. But I'm not a hunter at all. She smiled guiltily. So my friend will have to run home as soon as possible. I think it's getting dark. The man opened his eyes wide. Really? He stretched out in surprise. Such a dog should definitely go hunting. I'm telling you this as a hunter with experience. And otherwise, why did you get this breed? Would you have gotten a Chihuahua? For example, sensing the irony, Daria rolled her eyes resentfully. I didn't get that particular breed on purpose. I didn't know when I found the baby that he was such a catch. She looked at Rio and stroked his head affectionately. At the same time, the dog sniffed the clothes of the man who approached them. It turned out he was sniffing something very interesting to him. Did you find it surprising? Asked the man. How so? It's a red Irish setter. Such dogs are not on the road. They are not only expensive, but also rare. How come you didn't know? They are. Laughing, replied Daria. My son and I found it on the road. Somebody left a baby on the side of the road. Dumped a little puppy. It wasn't far from here, by the way. We were just on our way back from the cottage. That can't be. The man replied indignantly. What kind of owners are these? You know, I know the owner of the kennel that breeds these beauties. That man would never, ever sell his puppy to anyone he didn't know. He well selects new owners for his dogs, even conducts various checks and tests. And here it is. I'm totally shocked. He continued to be indignant. How is it? Daria replied in a quiet voice. I guess I'll go now, it's getting dark. Wait. The hunter wanted to take the girl's hand, but stopped, deciding that such a movement would be indecent. What is your name? Daria replied, smiling. Lovely name, answered the man, my favorite since Daria, the goddess of the hunt. She laughed warmly in response. What is your name? Daniel? You can just call me Dan. He smiled. You said you had a house here. Perhaps we could see each other again. I'd introduce you to the owner of the kennel I told you about. He would tell you a lot more about this breed than I think we could meet. Embarrassed, Daria replied. She raised her head and looked carefully into the hunter's eyes. The color of his eyes fascinated her. Blue, bright, like a clear spring sky. We live over there. She pointed with her hand in the direction of her dacha. The plots are numbered. Ours is the third. Come by tomorrow evening, for example. I've taken a few days off work, interviewed my son at school. We'll be here for at least a week. Daniel got a look. I can't tonight. The best time to hunt birds is right around sunrise or sunset. Like now, for example. He smiled broadly. By the way, I was just walking toward the pond. Take a good look. Maybe you could let your dog go for a good run with me, and then I'll bring him back to you. Daria thought about the duck. No, not at all. He put his hands up. You can't shoot ducks now, only Seleznev. He shifted his gaze to the dog that had not killed his leg so far. You know, I think your dog is all for it. He doesn't need to be trained. I've seen him pick up birds. I think he can do it. What do you think? The landlady, of course, was going to refuse such an offer. However, the man's beautiful eyes made it very difficult, this answer option. Of course, she didn't know at all. She didn't know who he was. Didn't know what to expect from him. What if he stole her? She scrutinized the man, then shifted her gaze to Rio. She thought about it. Sorry, But no, she still refused to Daria, and she wished she could say yes. She wanted her dog to do what he was supposed to do, but fear for her pet overpowered her. I don't know you at all. Fair enough. Daniel smiled broadly. In that case, you and I will have time to get to know each other. Daria started, and I hope she spent a few more long seconds looking at the man with confusion. There was something about him that tugged at the delicate strings of her soul. There was in him a masculinity, a bravery of undeniable strength, and even nobility. Daria was too shy to ask her new acquaintance how old he was, but she guessed that he was older than her, but not by much. Daria had never really thought about hunting as a hobby. It was a hobby. It always seemed barbaric to her, not modern. It's one thing to buy meat to make dinner for your family, and quite another when it's just entertainment, killing for fun. It made her cringe. All in all, she didn't quite know how she should feel about such a sport. Nor had she known any hunters until now. But Daniel seemed a good-natured man, interesting and intelligent. Mommy screamed, "Thomas, Mammy, where did you go?" The boy ran out of the house when he saw his mother through the window. I thought something was wrong. Oh, Thomas, I'm sorry. Mom grabbed her head. I didn't realize you'd be so worried. And I didn't get a chance to come back earlier. Of course I will. What happened? Where'd he run off to? The boy was right next to Rio, examining him from different angles. Kid, are you okay? He asked, putting the flask of his favorite dog with his head. It's all right. Don't worry, reassured the mother to her son. Walked up to Thomas and kissed him on the top of his head. Rio chased the birds as usual. Thomas laughed warmly. He must think he'll take off on his own one day. Where was he in the field? Do you remember when we used to walk there in the summer? And we met someone. Who? Thomas asked in surprise with one uncle. Telling about Dan, Daria was momentarily embarrassed he was a hunter. He said that our Rio is also a born hunter. That's why he chases pigeons in the park. Even offered to take our Rio hunting. But I refused. I don't know this man to hunt yet. The boy's eyes rounded with delight. Shit, Mom, why did you say no? Rio, alas, was a real tough dog and would have caught us a bear. Daria laughed, but not a bear, but a duck, maybe. I actually like duck. By the way, it's been a long time since you cooked Putin, and the legs. Thomas hugged the dog once more and then rose to his feet. He folded his arms across his chest with a smart look. Or maybe I want to go hunting too, he said suddenly. Asked this uncle. Maybe he'll take me too. Surprised, his mother splashed her hands. Honey, I told you, I don't know him at all. How can I give him Rio and trust you? Maybe, sure, but later. But Mom. The boy was indignant and, calling the dog with him, walked deep into the lot. A few hours after the unexpected encounter, Daria and her family were walking slowly along the plots, looking around carefully. During this time, she had already managed to sort out all the things they had brought with them to clean the house. After the long winter, when all the chores were done, the family went out for an evening walk with Rio. The dog made a careful detour all around, every now and then, listening to something that apparently only he could hear every now, and then the dog would freeze in place on you in his dangling ears. And sometimes he would get into a stance as if preparing to jump, noticing something that Rio was ready to lunge at. Daria would stand too, spreading her legs wide so she wouldn't fall. When the dog had done all his business and Thomas and his mom were about to walk toward the house, an attentive Rio froze in place and then tore off with such force that Daria couldn't keep the leash in her hands. Rio, what on earth are you going to do, Rio? Shouted. She ran after the dog to her mom. Stop, suddenly Thomas shouted. I'll catch up with him myself. With these words, the boy ran forward. Daria stopped abruptly. How grown up is he? She thought, watching Thomas. So independent. Thinking so, she headed in the direction her son and the dog had run off in. After a few turns, Daria noticed an unusual sight. There in the distance stood her Thomas, actively gesticulating with his hands and telling something to an unfamiliar man. A mother's heart skipped a few beats. Who the hell is that? She managed to think. Concerned Mommy quickened her step, trying to get to her desired destination as quickly as possible, coming closer. She exhaled with relief, Standing next to Thomas was Daniel. The sight she saw made her heart beat faster and her cheeks visibly redden. Her son looked at his companion with a look of delight. Her favorite dog was circling nearby. Now and then jumped on Danya and pawed his clothes with dirty paws. Suddenly a thought popped into David's head. She liked Daniel. He looked so harmonious, so attentive to little Thomas. He could probably replace a father to a child. And Thomas has never had a male role model. He has no one but me, she thought wistfully. Daria put on her most welcoming smile, fixed her hair, and moved forward. Daniel, nice to meet you, she said, stepping closer. Daria, good evening. The hunter smiled broadly. I don't mind using the first name. I've already met your son. Why didn't you tell me he wanted to go hunting? I'd love to take Thomas with me. Oh, but Daria's embarrassed. How did you know he was my son? How do you two look alike? The man looked from David to Thomas and back again. I recognized your dog right away. He patted her on the head. He's a real hunter. He smelled game right away. Daria, please let him go out in the field. And Thomas, too. I could use some help, yes. Daria smiled faintly, lowered her gaze. Only now did she notice that a bag filled with game lay beside the man. It was immediately clear to her why Ria was so abashed at the new acquaintance. The expression on her face changed noticeably, which didn't go unnoticed by the tribute. Daria is all right, he asked. Then he followed the look. Womano, I'm sorry. I didn't offer you a fresh bird, did I? I'm not offering you a fresh bird now, of course. I have to butcher it first, but I'll be sure to bring you a mount tomorrow. Isn't it great? Asked the educated boy. Just today, I asked my mom to cook a duck, he told Daniel. Dan smiled and winked at Daria. By the way, how about this? I'll take Rio and Thomas hunting with me, and in return, I'll give you half of the spoils. Daria looked down at him and looked at him again. I don't mind. Finally, she answered. When will you go hunting next time? At dawn. He thought for a while. I proposed this option. Tomorrow morning, Thomas and I, and to hunt. And in the evening, I'll invite you to my place, cook what we catch, and you'll take your share, of course. I don't know if she's thinking about tomorrow so soon. But Mom, please. Thomas stretched out pitifully. Dan supported him. Please, please, he smiled. Rio sat down on the ground and touched his mistress' paws demandingly. But okay, Daria laughed and waved her hand and agreed. The next morning, Dan, taking Thomas and Rio with him, went hunting. The boy was absolutely thrilled with this pastime. All the next day, he talked about the birds he had caught, about hunting in general, and about Daniel. In the evening, the family came to visit the hunter and tasted the taste of the lower heavens. This was how Daria and her new acquaintances came to an agreement. She would allow her son and Rio to go out into the field with the man. In return, he would treat them to fresh meat. Daria sometimes wondered if it was me who owed him. Thomas is so happy, busy doing what he loves, but she wouldn't admit it to a man. Still, she enjoyed spending time with the hunter. Of course, their communication was not limited to this arrangement. The young people often went for walks together. Thomas and Rio would run ahead, and they would follow. Talking about everything, Daria could not admit to herself that she liked this guy. Her previous relationships had left a deep scar in her soul, but it was hard to go against her own feelings. And it was obvious that Daniel Daria liked him too, or even more so. They could talk for hours. They could walk without getting tired. The girl often noticed how the young man looked at her, how he looked into her eyes. Such moments turned everything inside her upside down. She wanted to scream, but kiss me at last, but she remained silent. Dani, on the other hand, was very modest. Maybe he was afraid Daria wouldn't reciprocate, or maybe he was afraid of ruining their relationship by being too hasty. In the end, each of them knew exactly what the other liked, but no one dared to take the next step. Toward the end of the week, as David and Thomas' unplanned vacation came to an end, they decided to stop by Dan's house to say goodbye. Upon learning that his new friends were leaving, Daniel was very upset, even though he had already planned to return to the city in the next few days. After some thought, he suggested that next weekend they go to a different place together. Fresh air. hunting. A small cabin in the middle of nowhere. As it turned out, he knew some good places he'd been renting for years. Daria was nervous, but agreed to stay with the man, to sleep in the same house. She both wanted what it could lead to and was afraid at the same time. At the same time, the following actions were taking place in a completely different place. The notary, who was also a close friend of the late Anthony. Frowning his eyebrows, gazing into the monitor, he ruffled his hair, stood up abruptly from his chair. Then, after thinking, sat back down. "So what's all the fidgeting about?" he asked. "How much longer do we have to wait for patience?" "Sebastian, now we will see everything," in a level tone replied the assistant. After the day Kelly had come to see him for the last time, Sebastian thought deeply. He couldn't figure out what had put the idea in his head. But it was clear to him as day that the lady was hiding something. He couldn't figure out what, and there was essentially no clue, unless you counted the very personality of this Kelly a nasty, vile, and obviously very evil woman. Sebastian was almost certain. She was definitely hiding something. It was time to think about it. The notary decided to question the deceased's entourage, not friends or relatives, but servants and subordinates. He asked very unusual and even strange questions without asking a word about Georgie, his death or his inheritance. He asked each of them only one thing: who Kelly was, according to his interlocutor. What is she as a person? The servants spat when they heard that name. The subordinates hid their eyes in shame. One thing was clear: nobody liked the lady. Intuition did not fail here. Then Sebastian, thinking long and hard about further actions, went for a trick from the security guard who worked at his friend's house. He found out that there were surveillance cameras all around the perimeter of the property, as well as in the house itself. He found out that they had been installed over 12 years ago, just when Kelly had cheated on Anthony. Sebastian had also known about this fact for a long time from the cheating husband himself. As it turned out, the cameras were tiny, inconspicuous, and Kelly was unaware of them. The only thing left to do was to get the records from the date of Anthony's death and see if there was anything suspicious that day. For the past hour, Sebastian and his assistant Benjamin had been going through the camera footage. They scrutinized every corner of the large property, but nothing suspicious had happened. Then they started to look at the footage from the house, but there was nothing there either. When the lawyers had almost given up hope, thinking that they would never find anything, they noticed the strange behavior of the couple in the living room. The very moment when Anthony brought the dog into the house, when the couple began to quarrel. And now the woman ran off to her bedroom, and the worried husband followed her. There they are in the bedroom. There's the bastard, pretending to sob. And then, oh my God, look, shouted out the worried Ben. This is the moment of death. With a lump in his throat, he said. Yes, quietly whispered to Sebastian's assistant. What they saw shocked them. Sebastian was right. She was the one to blame for his friend's death. She was the one who hadn't called an ambulance for him in time. That was it. Kelly be damned. Sebastian rose sharply to his feet, but she would pay for this. He said harshly, "But Chief, who gets the inheritance then?" The aide asked gently. "I don't care who. The main thing is that I will do everything I can to make sure that this woman gets a fair punishment for the death of my friend." And Daria, Dan, Thomas, and Rio came to the country. Dan had rented a beautiful, spacious hunting lodge deep in a centuries-old forest. The young hunter had made sure everything went smoothly in advance. He chose a suitable house for rent, bought the necessary groceries, and didn't forget to bring some treats for Rio and extra gear for Thomas this weekend. Dan, though he tried not to show it, wasn't hoping for flying prey. He wanted Daria to be his true friend. Arriving at the appointed place, the woman began to carefully arrange her things. Dan, standing next to her, looked at her with loving eyes. "Maybe later," he asked, smiling. "Now let's go to the forest. And soon Thomas and I will go hunting." "Well, Oscar will wait, Daria asked, laughing. "What the hell is that?" "But things also, laughing," he replied. "Things can be sorted out later. I would help you with that. Right now we need to assess the terrain. Thomas, Rio, you to the window. Let's go, let's go." The baby and the dog jumped happily in place. The whole company left the house. They walked slowly, measuredly. Every now and then Danila stopped to look around, and Rio followed him, sniffing every bush carefully. "I would never have noticed," the girl said, pointing her head at another trail. "But you're so attentive, you see everything. By the way, whose trail is this? A boar?" answered Dan. And then he raised his eyebrows in surprise, because right behind him someone's voice synchronously answered David's question. A huge boar. The older man, unfamiliar to her, repeated cheerfully, "Daniel, nice to meet you." Also came Spring. Benjamin, the hunter, took the confident step towards him and shook the hand of the acquaintance firmly. That's what a professional means. No animal can hear you. You move so stealthily. Benjamin smiled, it's all experience. He shifted his gaze to Daria. "I'm so glad you'll come to your senses. How beautiful is your wife," he said. Daria blushed, and Daniel coughed embarrassedly. "It's not me. Why did he come to you?" His comrade interrupted him. "I don't remember you being here. I think that dog is mine. Where did you buy this handsome dog? Did you get off the street? An owl? What kind? Oh, he's so handsome." He rubbed the backs of those who didn't resist at all. "Rio. Oh my. Is it a good thing we met you? I forgot I promised Daria." Dan looked at his companion. "Meet Benjamin, owner of the best kennel of red Irish sweaters. Remember I told you about him? Eh? Hello." The beautiful girl smiled and extended her hand. "I'm Daria, and this is my son Thomas. I didn't buy this dog, you know. I found him on the highway. Somebody threw him out when he was just a baby. That Benjamin seemed so lazy." "What kind of nonsense is that? It can't be." Daria shrugged. "Maybe you and I found our Rio on the way back from the cottage. Was it like that?" "Stop impolitely," Rio's kennel owner interrupted her. "Is that really our Rio de Janeiro? He was bought from me by a good man, also a hunter. Unfortunately, he died. It can't be the same dog you have. He still has his owner." Benjamin unceremoniously approached the dog, ordered him to lie down. The man's stern and confident voice convinced the dog not to show off, but to obey the command. Probably it was the result of years of experience with dogs. Or maybe Rio realized something when the breeder scrutinized his belly. He almost jumped with surprise. "This is indeed the branding of my kennel. Where did you say you found it?" And Daria, together with Thomas, once again told the story of how they met Rio on the road. Benjamin's eyes grew sterner, his eyebrows furrowed sternly. After listening, he said menacingly, "Did Kelly get rid of the puppy after Anthony died?" "No, she'd always been a peculiar woman, of course, but not like that." His eyes went blank. His expression was one of utter disappointment. "I've always been so careful about choosing owners. I wanted my dogs to live with decent people, and now this. We're decent people, too." Little Thomas interjected into the conversation. The older man smiled affectionately at him. "Oh, I'm sorry. I'm glad Rio has found a new family." "Of course, and I can see you're taking good care of him. But the way Kelly's been acting, I'm gonna go over there and find out. I'm sorry, folks. I gotta go. Dan, I'll call you back." With that, the kennel owner walked away with a quick stride. "That's how it is, isn't it?" He shuffled from foot to foot in embarrassment. "Why is he going to see Laura?" asked Daria, starting to get visibly nervous. "Why does he want our dog back?" "Not giving it back is our dog Daria. It's okay." The guy calmed her down. "You don't have to worry so much." "Yeah, Mom, don't worry. This guy seems cool." "He won't do that." "I hope not," the woman said quietly. It was night. The company had already returned from the hunt, having caught a lot of game. Thomas ate a hearty dinner and went to bed on the second floor, while Rio quietly suggested the spacious recliners in the corner. Daria sat in front of the fireplace, putting her hands to the fire, and the dialogue with Benjamin did not come out of her head. What will happen now? She wondered. What if this Kelly wanted Rio back? She was snapped out of her musings by a gentle touch on her shoulder and the low voice of a tribute. "Are you worried about everything?" "Yes, I am," she confirmed, realizing that it was unlikely that a man like Benjamin would bring the dog back alive. But suddenly she looked up sharply and only now realized how close Dan was to her. Her head spun, her fingertips began to prick, and she wanted to pull away, shying away from the unnecessary closeness. But the beauty of Dan's eyes so mesmerized her that she was unable to move. The scent that emanated from the hunter's dura beckoned piney, subtle notes. He literally smelled like a forest, a woody odor and the smell of gunpowder. She shifted her gaze from his eyes to his lips. "It's like I can feel the change coming," she said in a whisper. "So do I," Dan answered. And unable to hold back any longer, she pressed her lips to his. His kiss was so tender. He seemed to stop breathing, afraid of offending the girl of his dreams, when he gently pulled away. Daria, on the other hand, took the initiative. From that very night, the couple became one and never parted again. A few days later, the young people, overwhelmed with happiness, could not think of anything else. They could not get enough of each other's company. Every day the couple spent together, and the thought of parting for a moment drove them crazy. One similar morning, Daniel, who was self-employed and free from strict schedules, invited Daria to a cafe to have breakfast together. When the couples were already brought the menu and they started to choose their meals, Daniel's cell phone suddenly rang. "Who is it?" Daria asked carefully. "Something important. It can't wait. Let's see." Daniel pulled his smartphone out of his pocket. "Benjamin is calling," suddenly the hunter said. "If you want, I won't answer it." Benjamin is the owner of the kennel. She is interested, pitched forward. "Answer it quickly." Suddenly, he's already gone to see the woman. Dan shrugged his shoulders and answered the phone. As the conversation progressed, the expression on his face changed. After many minutes, he finally hung up the phone and looked at his beloved seriously. "So what's the impatience there?" she asked. "Speak rather differently. I will go crazy." No, Daria. No one is taking your dog," said Dan. "It's Kelly. I think she's going to do time." "What? Why?" Daria immediately calmed down about Rio. "So that's the profile of Rio's ex-mistress, huh?" "Yeah, a normal person would never do something like that." "So what did she do?" "I think she killed her own husband." After saying those words, the man finally exhaled. "And I knew him. Or rather, I'd crossed paths with him a couple times while hunting. This man, Anthony, knew my father well. When Benjamin told me that a good friend of his had died, I didn't realize it was about him. He was a good, soulful man. I'm so sorry." Daria took his hand. "But how did she kill him?" "Technically, she didn't kill him. He had a heart attack, and she didn't call an ambulance. She stood by and watched him die, waiting until he was beyond saving." This was all recorded by hidden CCTV cameras. Shortly before he died, Anthony bought it from Benjamin. And a couple months before that, his faithful and old dog died. And he took it very hard. It was as if Anthony sensed something. By the same day, he picked up Rio. He went to a notary and made a will about his wife's failure to provide care. It was his notary who found out. They were friends. He sensed something too, and started digging up Kelly. Now she's in custody, and she's facing real time. "How awful," Daria replied quietly. "But how did Benjamin know all this from that notary? By the way, he said that we should visit his office." Daniel frowned, puzzled. "I didn't understand why, though, did I? It's really strange." Daria confirmed his words. "But since it's my day off today, maybe we could go right away." "Do you know the address?" "I do. Let's go," Dan said. And with his hand, he invited the waiter to serve the bill. Half an hour later, they were at the right place. Getting out of the car, Daria looked around the neighborhood while they called someone, arranging to be admitted. A couple minutes later, an assistant notary appeared in the lobby of the office. A young guy named Benjamin. He smiled intriguingly when he saw the client and invited them in. On the threshold of his office, Sebastian was already waiting for them. Very satisfied and even happy. "Good afternoon." He greeted them. "I hope you had a good trip. How may I address you?" Daria answered the visitors, embarrassed. "And this is Daniel, my friend." "Nice to meet you, Daria." He repeated the name slowly, as if tasting it. "Daria is a beautiful name, the goddess of the hunt. You knew that, didn't you?" My late client had a passion for hunting like nothing else in this world. Tell me, did you know the late Anthony? No, the woman answered. I did, but unfortunately not as well as I would have liked. My father knew him well, Daniel added. Great, great. Sebastian opened the door of his office wide, inviting the young men in. He pressed a small button on the landline phone and asked the receptionist to bring everyone coffee with lemon or milk. As if deliberately delaying the time, he asked, Sebastian, don't take this the wrong way, but why did you invite us? He asked Daniel straight in the forehead. The notary smiled enigmatically. Good question. Please sit down. The fact is that my late client and dear friend made a very unusual will, as he had no children or other relatives. He decided that when he died, his estate would go to someone who shared his life views and values. Of course, he was married, but you already know what his wife did. He cast a bitter glance around the audience and continued, seeing the sympathy on the faces of his interlocutors. Many people thought Anthony was strange and unloved. That was partly true, but he was a kind man, very intelligent, and thought that dogs were much better than people. You're probably wondering why he didn't leave a will for his wife, because he knew who she really was. Yeah, he didn't divorce her. He had a soft, heartfelt pity, but he always knew she was only in it for the money. So when he began to feel his days were coming to an end, he decided to leave this unusual will. Before his death, he had bought an expensive hunting dog, but since he assumed that he might soon give his soul to God, he decided to take care of his new friend, and who would shelter him in case of his master's death. After all, as you've realized, he knew that his spouse would by no means deal with the puppy. Really, he had no idea how nasty she'd be, so concluded the notary. I am now going to read you his will. It sounds like this. He took out of the safe a document on colored watermarked letterhead and read aloud all my property, wherever it may be and in whatever form it may consist, which will belong to me at the time of my death, including my house, bank deposits, and the like, shall go to the person who provides proof that my Brazilian is in good standing. Also, that person must name the V6 and the code. That Sebastian looked carefully at his interlocutors. The number, if you wish, 6 digits. Do you think you know someone who could claim this inheritance? A Brazilian? Daria said the strange words quietly. That's our Rio, our dog, an Irish setter. Rio's full name is Rio de Janeiro. Yes, Sebastian smiled contentedly. That's right. We're talking about a red Irish setter dog. Really, we'll have to establish that the dog is exactly what we need. As you probably know, he must have a chip with a unique number. As for the numerical code, I think you should know that as well. And I think I do know, Daria said thoughtfully. She frowned a little, remembering the thing that had kept her busy for so long, exactly the number. I know that number. Joyfully, she replied. Literally the very next day, Daria and Rio were on their way to the examination to present the proof for the notary. A panel of reputable veterinarians, smiling, determined that this dog was indeed very well looked after. A little later, Daria, going through her jewelry box, found the right code. The same numerical code that she and Thomas had found in the capsule that hung on little Rio's collar. Thus, Daria received an incredible inheritance, a huge house, and a large sum of money. It's a small apartment Kelly's left behind. Unfortunately, or fortunately, she never needed it. She had already been using another service apartment for several weeks in one of the colonies of the Federal Penitentiary Service of the Federal Penitentiary Service. Daria and Daniel got married a few months later. At first, Dan did not want to move into Anthony's house. He was embarrassed that his bride had such a large dowry. But what won't you do for the one you love? Most of the money Daria had invested in the organization of shelters for homeless animals. After all, he was already earning well. And the rest she put aside for the education and future of her children. Why children? Because she already had a new little heart beating under her heart. Soon Thomas had a little sister, and then another. Rio wasn't without gifts either. One early fall morning, he was thrilled to find a little redhead in the yard. She was very shy and trembling, hiding her slender tail between her hind legs. But Rio's alert cavalier quickly explained to her that no one would ever hurt her here. Every hunting season since then, Doria, tangled in a warm plaid, usually stood on the veranda for a long time, holding a hot cup of steaming coffee, and looking after her most beloved and closest in this life, a tall, well-built, blue-eyed man to his young companion, a teenager, and two cheerful, gusty Irish senators, hot as fire and bright as the low sun rising on the forests.